Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku moved into Artagnan University? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Even your destination, don't know. Are you sure you aren't scared? But each step you take will change you. The day has come. The day, porno graffiti. I'm moving in. As an only child, Izuku Midoriya was used to being coddled by his mother. He loved her, he really did. But he wished that she would stop clinging to him and crying. Especially when he needed her help to carry his belongings into his new dorm room. He chuckled nervously and tapped her shoulder. "Mom, I know you're gonna miss me, but, do you want to help me?" "Oh," she exclaimed, flushing slightly. "I'm sorry, Izuku honey." Dabbing at her tears one last time, she put the tissues away and grabbed Midoriya's laundry basket, which was full of snacks and instant meals. "I still can't believe my little boy is off to college, and such a good one at that." After tossing his sheets onto his bed, Midoriya smiled sheepishly. Is it really that good?" he mumbled. "Oh, don't be so modest," she cried, pulling him into another hug. "Artagnan University has one of the best medical programs. And your old doctor is a professor here too, Dr. Yagi. What did you used to call him? All Might?" Midoriya laughed at the memory. As a young child, he was quite anxious about the doctors. Dr. Yagi managed to change that by coming into his appointments dressed in a superhero costume, declaring it's all right. Because All Might is here. From then on, young Midoriya would always look forward to doctor's appointments. Terrifying needles, unpleasant-tasting medicines, and mending broken bones all became necessary procedures to turn him into a superhero sidekick, working alongside All Might to save people. The childish notions faded away over time, but the general idea did not. Midoriya had decided to go into the medical field because of his childhood hero. As they worked together to move suitcases into the room, Midoriya's mother continued. "And not only that, you got into this special dorm too. What's the program called?" "It's the residential college, Mom," he answered with a smile. He'd seen her poring over all of his acceptance letters several times over. How did she miss the name of the program? But he supposed that she was too busy focusing on the phrases, top scores, special first-year experience, and free housing. Artagnan's residential college program was a unique program designed to reward incoming freshmen for their achievements. The top 40 applicants, based on test scores, grade point average, essays, and interviews, were invited to live in a special dorm together. They were also placed in the same core classes so that their dorm mates were also their classmates, making cooperation and study sessions easier to manage. And of course, since these students were the best of the best, the housing fee was waived, saving their families several $1,000s per semester. And they could even continue in the program for all 4 years, if they maintained their GPAs and didn't get into trouble. Wasting no time, Midoriya's mother unzipped one of the suitcases and started filling up his wardrobe. "So does your roommate have any of these core classes with you?" Midoriya glanced around the room. The other side of the room was already unpacked and ready. A lamp, pencil cup, and a laptop was carefully arranged on the desk in the back of the room, with a small plain calendar hanging on the wall next to it. As his roommate promised, he had brought the television. A small 19-inch sat on a nightstand which he had moved between their desks so they both had easy access to it. His bed was adorned with navy blue sheets and pillows that matched the circular plush rug in the middle of the floor. A sleeve from a button-down shirt poked out from the closed doors of his wardrobe. Without thinking, Midoriya crossed the room to nudge it back in. Everything was here, except for him. What was the question again? Midoriya replied, "Yeah, we're all in the same classes, actually. Same major to..." "Well, I guess officially it's biology." His mother squealed and clasped her hands together. "That's wonderful. I hope you two become friends." Midoriya simply nodded. He himself hoped that his roommate would be friendly, but judging by his one-word replies when Midoriya tried to make contact with him, it was going to be difficult. They continued unpacking in relative silence. Midoriya was starting to think he would do pretty okay on his own, until he opened up the bedsheet package and encountered the fitted sheet. He got it on the third try. The first time, it was the wrong direction. The second time, it was the right direction, but he had trapped the pillowcases and the comforter underneath it. After what felt like forever, everything was unpacked. Clothes, sheets, refrigerator, food, shower things, all of it. Midoriya stood back to admire their work and was caught off guard by his mother lunging forward into a hug. "One more hug, okay?" she asked. This time, he hugged her back. "You call me every weekend, okay?" Midoriya winced. He could hear her start sniffling again. "You're the only child I have." He squeezed her tighter. "I promise, Mom. Come on, let's go get lunch." She pulled back, drying her tears once more. Walking out of the doorway, she called back, "Don't forget your keys, honey." "I won't," he answered reflexively. Midoriya had set one foot outside his room when he realized his room key was still on his nightstand. He doubled back to get it and greeted his mother with a sheepish smile. She didn't reprimand him. She was too busy studying his door. "So that's your roommate, huh? I swear I've heard that last name before," she commented. Midoriya glanced at the door and found a plaque he hadn't noticed on the way in. 401. Izuku Midoriya. Shudo Todoroki. His mother waved her hand dismissively. "It'll come to me later, I guess." Her eyes suddenly lit up. "Hey, Kaken goes to this school, right? Did he get into this program too?" Midoriya scratched the back of his head. "You know, Mom, I'm not sure." He pointed across the hall at another door plaque. 402. Katsuki Bakugo. Ijuru Kirishima. She squealed again and started pinching his cheeks. Midoriya almost asked if she could go back to hugging him and crying. It was far less embarrassing. "You already have a friend here and he's across the hall from you," she exclaimed. Midoriya could only laugh nervously. Lunch was less emotional than Midoriya had expected. They had found a small cafe not too far from campus and had a relatively quiet lunch. The prices were slightly more expensive than Midoriya was used to, but the quality of the food was miles and miles above the usual fast food fare. Coming from a large city, the small town of Dumas was refreshing and somehow calming. No car horns, no sirens, no sketchy back alleys he had to avoid on the way to school. He could get used to crickets, rolling hills, and actually seeing the stars at night. Unlike earlier, Inko Midoriya left while shedding relatively few tears. It seemed that she had exhausted her tear ducts. After one last hug and a reminder to call home every now and then, she got into the car and left. Midoriya stood on the curb and waved for longer than he had meant to. Soon, there was nothing to wave at. His mother's car had vanished into the hills long ago. As soon as he lowered his hand, it really hit him. He was on his own now. His family and familiar home was hours away. There was no one here he knew, except for Kaken. If Todoroki would reply to his texts with more than one word, maybe he would count too. His chest tightened and he had to bite his lip to stop the tears. He suddenly felt very lonely. Slowly, he scaled the stairs back up to the 4th floor. He could hear snippets of conversation through the hallways, roommates meeting and greeting one another, parents saying tearful goodbyes, and strangers inviting strangers to hang out. None of it was helping the loneliness that was tugging at his heart. He wished that anyone would talk to him. Upon reaching the 4th floor, he had half a mind to rescind his wish. "Do." Midoriya yelped and almost fell backwards. Pointing and yelling at him was a complete stranger. He was slightly taller than Midoriya, with neat black hair and intense blue eyes staring at him behind a pair of glasses. Who was this guy? Was he in trouble already? "Why yes," he answered, in a much higher pitch than usual. In a large, exaggerated motion, the other boy placed his hands on his hips and announced, "My name is Tenya Ida and I have been placed in charge of the 4th floor." Midoriya scratched his head. "So you're what are they called? The residential assistant? Wait, does that mean you're an upperclassman?" In another exaggerated motion, Ida shook his head. "Not quite, but I am going around telling everyone about the floor meet greet." Pointing down the hallway, he added, "In the 4th floor lounge at 7 o'clock tonight." "Sounds great," Midoriya replied. But there was something still bothering him. "Wait, hang on, did you mean you weren't quite the Ara or weren't quite an upperclassman?" he called. But it was too late. Ida had already run off and was knocking on another door. Midoriya decided to slip back into his room before Ida reached Bakugo's door. Midoriya did not recall ever messing with the thermostat in his dorm room, but for some reason, it felt like stepping into a sauna. Wiping sweat from his brow, he turned to the thermostat next to the door and was surprised to see it set at 82 degrees Fahrenheit. He turned it back down to a reasonable 72, all the while muttering complaints. He had his second heart attack of the day when a voice from behind him said, "I'm cold, don't touch that." He bit back another scream and whipped around. There was no one here? His mind arrived at the most logical conclusion. The dorm room was haunted. Midoriya's fears were assuaged when a figure popped out from underneath his roommate's bedsheets. He seemed to be wearing a long-sleeved white shirt and red plaid pajama briefs. Upon sitting up, he pulled the sheets tighter around his shoulders. In a word, his roommate was striking. His hair color was split perfectly down the middle, scarlet on the left and snow white on the right. His left eye was a startling bright blue while his right was a dull gray. Any normal person would assume that he had dyed half of his hair and bought some color contacts as some sort of statement. Instead, Midoriya the medical nerd assumed, correctly as he later learned, that he had tetragrammatic chimerism. He was beside himself. He had always read about chimeras, organisms that originate from two or more different zygotes, but always assumed that chimerism in humans was rare. Well, that wasn't entirely true. Most cases of human chimerism was just very hard to detect. Some organs would have different DNA than other organs, and maybe someone would have one regular thumb and one hitchhiker's thumb, but this was straight down the middle, almost perfect chimerism. But wait, what is that over his left eye? Oh good God, that is a very large burn mark. He had so many questions. Don't ask me any of those questions, snarled Todoroki. Midoriya immediately clamped his hand over his mouth. I was mumbling, wasn't I? I'm sorry. Do you always mumble like that? He asked. And no, well not always, just sometimes when I'm Midoriya realized that he had started again and shook his head. I'm sorry, let's start over. He held out his hand and said, Hi. Izuku Midoriya. Todoroki's mismatched eyes studied Midoriya's hand as if trying to detect some sort of trap. Finding none, he reached out and shook it. Shudo Todoroki. Before Midoriya could stop himself, he jumped a short distance in the air. Great. So I don't know if you heard about the meeting at 7, right? Todoroki sighed. Guess I'll have to go to that? Yeah, Midoriya started twiddling his thumbs. I was kinda wondering, after the meeting, would you like to go grab dinner at one of the dining halls? No, answered Todoroki, retreating back underneath his bedsheets. Midoriya sighed and grabbed his laptop. Why did he have to nerd out at his roommate? Why on earth did he have to mention the burn mark? He'd have to think up a proper apology for later. For now, he logged onto the school website and brought up a campus map in his schedule. Wow, he only had one class on Friday. Wait, but it was 3 hours long. Midoriya simply resolved to complete his biology labs as fast as possible. He didn't start his day too early or end it too late, and he had ample time in between classes. Excellent. At first he didn't like the idea of the residential college advisors picking his class schedule for him, but it turned out all right, for this semester, at least. After glancing at the legend on the map, Midoriya was also delighted to find out that all of his classes were less than 5 minutes away on foot. And there was even a buffet-style dining hall in the center of the 4 residential college dorms. This program really did live up to its name as a unique first-year experience. He hoped that he could maintain his GPA to stay in the program all 4 years. Shivering, he reached for a throw blanket on his bed. It wasn't until after he had draped it around his shoulders that he realized that he had set the thermostat to 72 and yet it felt like a brisk winter's day. He glanced up to see a very upset Todoroki with his hand on the thermostat. Stop mumbling, he growled. Sorry, Midoriya squeaked. For the next few hours, Midoriya kept his hand clamped firmly on his mouth to avoid upsetting his already irritated roommate. On occasion, he glanced up from his laptop to try to start a conversation, but Todoroki never emerged from his blanket cocoon. 5 minutes before 7, he closed his laptop and padded over to the mirror. If he was going to meet everyone on the floor, he might as well look okay. After studying his reflection, Midoriya came to the conclusion that he was pretty good the way he was, plain green shirt, jeans, and socks. He ran his hand through his hair once in an attempt to tame his fluffy emerald hair. There was no visible difference, but at least he tried. He turned around to call for Todoroki, only to have his third heart attack of the day. He was looking into a mirror. How in God's name did he not realize Todoroki was right behind him? Not realizing that he had taken 10 years off of Midoriya's life, Todoroki asked, "Well, are we going or not?" Midoriya mutely nodded and the two left their room. Aramis Hall was surprisingly small. Each residential floor only had 8 rooms, 7 for students and 1 for the RA. Situated in the middle of the floor were the restrooms and the lounge, which consisted of a few couches and armchairs, a large coffee table, a television, the floor's community refrigerator, and a microwave. A few residents were already there, including Ida. Midoriya waved his hand, but Ida responded with one of his bizarre hand gestures. "Please, hold all introductions until everyone is here," he ordered. Meekly, Midoriya lowered his hand and took a seat next to him. They didn't have to wait long. Within a minute, all 14 residents were present. As soon as the last person took their seat, Ida rose and gestured once more. "Thank you for attending this meeting. This should be short and painless. We'll go around introducing ourselves. Give your name, major, and something about yourself." Amidst a few disappointed groans, he continued, "My name is Tenya Ida, a mechanical engineering major. I am also on the track team, so come out and see us sometime." Sitting down, he gestured to his left, indicating the rough direction of the introduction circle. The next boy was quite timid, despite his large and muscular appearance. He twiddled his thumbs for a while before he made a whimpering sound and glanced hopefully at the person next to him. He was tall and slender, with dazzling blue eyes and perfectly styled blonde hair. "You'll have to excuse my roommate, he isn't fond of talking," the blonde boy explained. His large roommate smiled in relief. With a dramatic hand gesture, the blonde boy announced, "His name is Koji Kuda. He's an ecology major and his favorite animals are bunnies." Now gesturing to himself, he continued, "And I am Yuga Aoyama, theater arts major. I am very pretty." As the two sat down, the rest of the boys had to stifle their laughter. Such a strange pair, although there were probably other combinations much odder than the mute animal lover and the flamboyant dramatic. The next 2 boys in the circle stood up eagerly. The one with blonde hair and a pair of headphones around his neck pointed his thumb at himself and said, "Denki Kaminari. Electrical engineering major and pretty awesome gamer. Gamertag is Ampere for anyone that wants to join me. I have all of the current gen consoles, so not to worry." His roommate, Midoriya assumed, imitated his gesture and said, "Hanta Siro. Mechanical engineer, also a gamer. Gamertag is Spider Bro." Kaminari and Siro high-fived as they sat down. Midoriya quietly wished that he could get along with his roommate as well as those two. A blonde, lean boy stood up, chewing on what looked like a protein bar. "Mashareo Ojiro. I'm an accounting major, and I got here on a wrestling scholarship, so that's pretty cool." Another muscular boy stood up. Midoriya briefly wondered if he would be shy like Kuda. He seemed to be eating a cupcake. Ojiro gave him a distasteful glance and muttered, "Please don't talk with your mouth full." The boy simply nodded and finished off the rest of the cupcake in one bite. The rest of the residents stared at him in amazement and distaste. Throwing the cupcake wrapper away, he said, "My name is Rikidu Satu. Chemical engineering major. I love food, especially sweets." An awkward silence settled over the lounge as the two sat down. Another large, intimidating boy got to his feet. Midoriya was beginning to feel uncomfortable in a room where so many people could snap him in half, and said, "I'm Mezushuji. Business administration, and I'm here on a football scholarship." It took a while for Midoriya to realize that the boy next to Shuji had stood up, even counting the odd buns that passed for his hair. He couldn't have been taller than an 8-year-old. "I'm Minoru Mineta. Philosophy major. I like girls." For a while, no one stood up. Everyone focused on the next person in the circle, who did not seem to want to stop reading his book. He seemed like another person Midoriya did not want to cross, With him perched on top of the couch back in his stern resting face, he resembled some odd bird of prey. Someone finally stood up, but it wasn't the book boy. Ida pointed threateningly at him and yelled, "Fumikage Tokoyami, introduce yourself." "Why?" he replied in a flat voice. "Because I want to know more about you other than your name." Clearly irritated, Tokoyami marked his place in his book, was he using a black feather as a bookmark, and said, "English major. I don't like to be bothered. Happy now, mother?" Ida didn't seem to realize he was being insulted, as he replied with a firm yes. Amid some snickering, a boy with spiky red hair got to his feet. With a smile, he said, "Ichiro Kirishima, Materials Engineering Major." He pointed at Kaminari and Zero. "I game too, so you guys should add me. I'm Prometheus." Zero jumped up and stretched his arms toward Kirishima, saying, "Bro." Kirishima punched the air and replied, "Bro." Kaminari waved his hands in the air and chimed in, "Bro." "Oh my god, shut up." A chill traveled up Midoriya's spine. He knew that voice. Kirishima turned to the boy next to him, pouting. "Bakubro dash." Bakugo jumped to his feet and screamed, "I told you not to call me that." Kirishima folded his arms. "But Bakubro dash." It was then that Bakugo socked Kirishima in the jaw. The entire room was standing now, half of the boys poised to break up the fight. But the other boy was laughing? Kirishima snapped his fingers and declared, "That was cool. I'll call you anything you want, Bakugo." That was not how Midoriya expected the confrontation to end. The same went for the rest of the lounge. Reluctantly, they took their seats again. Bakugo, still standing, shoved his hands into his pockets. "Katsuki Bakugo. Criminal Justice Major. Don't F with me." Ida gasped. "Katsuki Bakugo, watch your language." As he sat back down, he replied with a snide, "F no." Once again, the entire room had to stifle their laughter. Ida looked as if he was about to give Bakugo the scolding of his life when Todoroki stood up. Rather than facing the others, Todoroki seemed to be more interested in talking to the ground. In a soft, emotionless voice, he said, "Shudo Todoroki. Biology major." There's nothing interesting about me." Bakugo smirked. "Hey, half and half, how about you tell us how you got that scar?" To this day, Midoriya wasn't entirely sure why he did what he did. He suddenly found himself in between his roommate and his childhood friend, screaming, "Kaken, you're being rude." Sarcasm mutating into malice, Bakugo seized Midoriya's shirt collar and wound up for a right hook. "I'll show you rude, you useless F-Deca-. The rest of the boys surged forward to separate the two. To Midoriya's relief, Shuji and Ojiro positioned themselves in front of him and assumed defensive stances. At least he knew these two would defend him if Bakugo got aggressive. The three gamers, Kirishima, Kaminari, and Zero, managed to hold him back. Kirishima yelled something to the other two, and they began moving slowly towards his dorm room. Once Bakugo was safely locked in his dorm room, the boys sighed and turned to Midoriya. Ida quietly asked, "Are you okay, Deku?" Midoriya winced. He guessed the nickname would stick here as well. And after all his hoping that college would be different. Todoroki stepped forward. "His name's Izuku Midoriya." Ida seemed confused. "Izuku? Deku, how on earth did he come up with that nickname?" Defenseless Izuku, Midoriya sighed. To him, "I'm just useless, Deku." "You're not useless," urged Ida. "I'm sure you have a great major and you'll help a lot of people with it." Midoriya scratched the back of his head. Ida began clapping his hands. "Impressive. And also a happy coincidence that the only pre-med majors on this floor are roommates." "The only pre-med majors on this floor, huh? Maybe he and Todoroki could bond over that." Midoriya glanced at him and found that his unreadable expression had not changed. Maybe getting along with his roommate was too much to hope for. "What is this feeling? So sudden and new. I felt the moment. I laid eyes on you. What is this feeling, Wicked?" 2. First impressions. Midoriya woke up feeling uncomfortably warm. At some point in the night, he had kicked off his blankets and managed to wriggle out of his pajama briefs. Blinking the sleep out of his eyes, he rose from his bed and checked the thermostat. He had set it at 72 last night, but he supposed Todoroki had woken up and adjusted it to 80. He turned his head and was amazed to see his roommate sleeping soundly under his usual pile of blankets. He sighed. Maybe there was something he could do to help. As much as he didn't want to rock the boat, Midoriya refused to deal with these ridiculous temperature changes. He set the thermostat back to 72 and draped his throw blanket over Todoroki to compensate. Didn't he own any hoodies or sweaters or anything? Midoriya made a mental note to ask him. If he invited him out to pick up a sweater, maybe he would actually hang out with him. As quietly as he could, he gathered his shower things and made his way to the bathroom. Once the door had shut behind Midoriya, Todoroki shifted and poked his head out from under his blankets. He reached out and gripped the extra blanket as the air conditioning unit whirred to life. As much as he disliked his roommate's constant muttering, it was nice that he always knew what was on Midoriya's mind. With his condition, of course he owned sweaters. If Midoriya were nosy enough, he could look into his wardrobe and find at least 10. But, upon hearing Midoriya's musings, something had tugged at him. What was that feeling? After cleaning himself up, Midoriya made his way down to the first floor with a map of the school on his phone. Since the freshmen were forced to move in a week prior to the start of classes, he had ample time on his hands. Might as well go explore the campus and try to find exactly where his classes were located. However, he was too busy poring over the map to notice where he was walking. A soft yelp brought his attention back to reality and he snapped his head up to see a girl. A very cute girl. "I'm sorry," she squealed. Her already pink cheeks seemed to turn pinker. "And no, I'm sorry. I wasn't looking, I'm sorry," he objected. He wasn't entirely sure how long he could look at her. Chocolate brown hair in a cute bob cut, round innocent eyes that perfectly matched the hue of her hair, a blush that seemed to be getting worse with every passing second. She was a cute little ball of sunshine. She offered him a smile, which melted his heart. "It's fine, really," she said cheerfully. Extending her hand, she continued, "My name is Ochako Uraraka. And you?" Returning her smile, he shook her hand and stuttered, I dash. Unexpectedly, Bakugo shoved his way between them, separating their hands. Midoriya was stunned momentarily, only managing to say, "Kaken?" At the mention of his childhood nickname, Bakugo turned to him and sneered. "What, Deku? Did you want to hold hands with your new loser girlfriend some more?" Satisfied with his one-liner, he sauntered off to one of the couches in the lounge and propped his feet up on the coffee table. Uraraka clasped her hands together. "Well, that guy was, Midoriya must have looked quite crestfallen because she immediately changed the subject. "So your name is actually Deku?" He sighed heavily. "No, it's Izuku Midoriya, but Kaken has called me Deku since we were little." He chuckled weakly. "I was always useless Deku to him." "I don't think you're useless." Midoriya stared at her, jaw agape. When was the last time he had heard those words? She smiled again. "And what's more, I think Deku is a cute nickname. If it doesn't bother you too much, can I keep calling you that?" He could feel heat rushing into his cheeks. Without thinking, he sputtered, "I think, coming from you, I could get used to Deku." She clapped her hands together and hopped into the air, exclaiming, "Yay! Hey, you want to grab breakfast with me?" "Yeah," he immediately replied. Midoriya could hardly believe his eyes or ears. He talked to a girl and they were going somewhere and she wasn't doing it because her friends made a bet? He pinched himself and confirmed that yes, this was reality. The two of them began talking as they headed towards the front doors and out to the nearest dining hall. Midoriya was surprised to find how easy it was to talk to Uraraka. She never interrupted him, she never belittled the subjects he brought up, she didn't get irritated when he started one of his muttering episodes. It was nothing like having a conversation with Bakugo. She was genuinely interested when he mentioned his medical aspirations, and he returned the favor when she revealed that her major was aerospace engineering. "Wow, there are so many engineers in our dorm. Why aerospace, if you don't mind me asking?" At this, she smiled sheepishly, twirling a strand of her hair around her finger. "Well, it's kind of a silly reason. My family was never really well off financially, and I really want to help them out. My parents always told me to shoot for the stars." "And what?" Midoriya grinned. "So you are literally shooting for the stars?" That's amazing, Uraraka. She blushed again as they entered the dining hall. The buffet seemed to have no limits. The cafeteria workers would ask what they wanted and scoop it onto a plate. No timers, no plate limits. The only restriction they seemed to have was kicking everyone out for an hour in between breakfast, lunch, and dinner hours to SWH menus. After her second plate, Uraraka asked, "So what about you? Why medical?" Midoriya opened his mouth to start explaining, but he was interrupted again by Bakugo? When had he gotten here? Taking a seat at their table, Bakugo chimed in, "He can't be a badass police officer like I can, so he chose a sissy major." He began loudly eating his eggs, sausages, and bacon. Midoriya hadn't even known that someone could eat so loudly. Wordlessly, Uraraka excused herself and gathered up her plates and cup. As she left, she offered him a small smile. Midoriya had suddenly lost his appetite. How did these situations always end with him and Bakugo alone? He didn't even try to stop Uraraka from leaving. Useless Deku as always. "Kaken," he called softly. "Wa?" he replied, mouth full of eggs. Midoriya started wringing his hands together. She was nice, wasn't she? Bakugo simply rolled his eyes and swallowed the food in his mouth. "She's an airhead like you. You don't need people like her." Under his breath, he added, "You just need me." As if to emphasize his point, he stabbed one of his sausages with his fork. Midoriya nodded mutely. He stood up and left, feeling much worse than he did earlier that morning. Bakugo kept working on his plate. Instead of going back to Aramis Hall, Midoriya wandered aimlessly through the campus. Take a left here, take the next 3 rights, go down this odd back alley, and maybe his terrible thoughts would get lost too and never find him. He kept walking, kept making turns, because he knew if he stopped, he would have time to start thinking, and he couldn't have that. Not yet. After what seemed like a small eternity, he finally slumped down on a stone bench. He was breathing and sweating heavily. Dumas was located in a hilly region, which meant that the Artagnan campus was covered in stairs. This was probably the closest to a workout he'd ever gotten in his life. He tilted his head to the sky, eyes unfocused, and had the sudden realization that he was probably dehydrated. So very dehydrated that he was hallucinating Ida jogging towards him with a water bottle. "Midoriya," the hallucination greeted. "Are you out enjoying this lovely weather as well?" He simply waved and said that no, he was just walking around and taking a rest. Well, that's what he meant to say, anyway. What actually came out of his mouth was an odd zombie-like rattle. The hallucination stopped and approached him cautiously. "Midoriya, are you all right?" This was a very friendly hallucination Midoriya had conjured up, probably from the part of his subconscious that wanted amicable, non-Bakugo company. It wasn't until Ida squirted water into his open mouth that he realized no, this was not an illusion, this was actually Ida, and he seemed very concerned. While coughing up water, he managed to say, Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," the other boy sternly objected. Ida held out his arm and said, "Come on, let's get you some water." Without thinking, Midoriya held onto his arm while they stumbled into the nearest building. Maybe Kaken would like Ida, Midoriya mused as he led him towards a water fountain. Or maybe Kaken would push him away like he pushed Uraraka away. Midoriya stopped drinking, instead letting the water stream over his lips. How many people had Bakugo pushed away from him over the years? How many friends had he missed out on because Bakugo didn't approve of them? How many years had passed with Bakugo being his only friend? New school, new me, Midoriya had told himself when he entered middle school. He graduated middle school with no new friends, everyone had avoided him, and though no one ever said anything to his face, he knew that people feared interacting with him because they feared Bakugo's wrath. New school, new me, Midoriya had told himself when he entered high school. He graduated high school as useless Deku. He was constantly told that he was inadequate and that Bakugo being friends with him was the greatest gift he would ever receive. New school, new me, Midoriya had told himself when he entered college. This time, he was going to do something about it. Bringing himself back up to his full height, he turned to Ida and said, "Hey, I kinda got lost. Do you mind walking me back to the dorm?" Ida gestured excitedly. Midoriya assumed that this was a positive exaggerated gesture, and replied, "Of course. If you don't mind, I would like to use this time to get to know you as well." Midoriya chuckled. "Fine with me," he agreed. "I'll have to know some of your strengths and weaknesses to properly plan a strategy for the egg hunt later this evening." Midoriya froze in his tracks. Egg hunt? The RAs of Aramis Hall knew that the freshmen would have to learn the campus layout somehow. A sensible person would plan scheduled tours. Nijire Hadu, the RA of the 3rd floor, came up with a campus-wide egg hunt. She and her co-conspirator Tamaki Amajiki, the RA of the 2nd floor, had hidden 100 plastic eggs all over campus in the course of one day. The rules were simple: go out and find eggs, bring them back to the dorm, and whichever floor had the most points won. Points were assigned according to color. There were 50 green eggs worth 1 point apiece, 25 blue eggs worth 5 points, 15 yellow eggs worth 10 points, 5 red eggs worth 35 points, 4 silver eggs worth 50 points, and a single golden egg worth a whopping 250 points. The freshmen would have to go looking for the eggs and have to remember how to get back to the dorm. Hadu thought it would be an excellent trial by fire to force the residents to learn the layout of their new home. Especially since the winning floor was promised priority on the lobby television for the next week. In the minutes leading up to the start of the egg hunt, the entirety of Aramis Hall was crammed in the 1st floor lobby, all talking over one another about how to best strategize. The 2nd floor boys seemed to be making some headway, as were the 3rd floor girls. The 4th floor boys, on the other hand, Ida slammed his palms on the coffee table. "Katsuki Baku, you cannot ambush the other residents and steal their eggs." Bakugo waved his hands dismissively. "Geez, square boy, I was kidding, mostly." Kirishima elbowed his unruly roommate. "Come on, Bakugo, that's just unmanly as all hell." Kaminari grinned as he tapped his temple with his forefinger. "You don't have to steal other people's eggs if you get to them first." "But none of us know the campus," cried Mineta. "It'd be way easier to just snipe eggs once the other floors find them." Kirishima, Kaminari, and Siro all appeared deeply offended at Mineta's words. Siro leaned towards him and chided, "Mineta, kill stealing is the worst sin imaginable." A confused Mineta replied, "But we're not stealing kills, we're stealing eggs." As the 4th floor boys devolved into screaming over each other, Midoriya buried his face in his hands. They were going to lose, he was absolutely sure of it. Someone tapped at his shoulder. Groaning, Midoriya lifted his head to see Ida, looking equally despondent. "We're doomed, aren't we?" Midoriya said dryly. "Yes, we are," Ida answered curtly. "I would like to ask, though, there are only 13 of us here. Where is Todoroki?" Midoriya was outside on the patio when the sun finally set, and he welcomed the cooler temperatures and the night breeze ruffling his hair. Feeling the goosebumps rise on his arms, he figured that he should grab a sweater for the egg hunt, just in case. Rifling through his wardrobe, he was slightly disappointed to see that his mother had only packed 3 coats: his worn, gray high school hoodie with small holes in the elbows, a lightweight track jacket, and a large emerald green knit sweater that he had never grown into. Sighing, he tied the knit sweater around his waist. He turned to the mound of bedsheets that was Todoroki and called, "Hey, the egg hunt's gonna start soon." No response. "The floor that wins gets dibs on the big TV in the lobby next week." Still no response. "Well, if you do decide to come, just head downstairs. And maybe we can get dinner after?" "No thank you," was the muffled reply. Midoriya sighed. "He's not coming, I guess," Midoriya told Ida. The other boy gestured rigidly. "Unacceptable," hissed Ida. "If we are to stand a chance of winning, the entire floor must be present." He ran off in a huff. Midoriya wasn't sure whether or not to tell him that the other 2 floors had 13 residents each, and thus, the floors were actually evenly matched without Todoroki. A girl with long, flowing blue hair and matching eyes leapt up onto a coffee table and shouted for silence. Midoriya figured that this must be Hadu. "So all y'all downloaded that app we told you to, yeah?" she asked the crowd. The residents murmured in agreement. Midoriya glanced at his own phone. The app in question seemed like a standard chat app with Artagnan's logo as the icon. This was some impressive school, having their own official chat app. Hadu continued. "Some of you probably figured it out, but you log in with your school ID and password and you'll be able to chat with the entire dorm, including me and Amajiki. We'll keep you updated on how many eggs have been found and call you back when all 100 are in our hands. Now go. There was a mad rush as all 40 residents shoved their phones into their pockets and bolted through the front doors. Midoriya meant to hang back and wait until the throng had subsided, but someone seized his arm and dragged him through the sea of students. He didn't see his assailant, but he had a pretty good idea of who it was. Once the people had scattered, Midoriya finally got a good look at him. Kaken. Of course it was. Bakugo kept sprinting forward, not caring whether or not Midoriya's arm got dislocated. Midoriya had no idea where they were headed. He was too busy trying not to trip over his own feet. There, Bakugo shouted. Get a move on, Deku. He finally released his death grip on the other boy's wrist and snatched up a green egg. While Midoriya stopped to catch his breath, Bakugo pointed over his left shoulder and said, "Come on, Deku, behind you. You gonna be useless forever?" Without complaint, Midoriya turned around and grabbed a blue egg sitting on a windowsill. He leaned against the brick wall of the building while Bakugo pulled out his phone. He smirked. 6 points, all right. The triumphant look on his face faded as his phone screen lit up. What the goddamn hell, how are they up that much? Confused, Midoriya took out his own phone and logged into the chat app. He was already invited to 2 conversations, Aramis Hall and 4th floor. Assuming that the standings would be listed in the main conversation thread, he tapped on Aramis Hall. Aramis Hall. 5 minutes. Nijirehadu, reminder, all eggs are on campus property. Do not go into town. Nijirehadu, current score. Nijirehadu, 2nd floor. Nijirehadu, 3rd floor 35. Nijirehadu, 4th floor 0. 35, muttered Midoriya. They must have found a red one. Or maybe 2 yellows and a blue. Bakugo groaned loudly. Grabbing the other boy's arm again, he shouted, less talking, more finding. Without Ida trying to police his behavior, Bakugo became quite aggressive in his pursuit of colored eggs. Midoriya knew very well that Ida's presence wouldn't have changed Kaken's behavior one bit, but at least someone would be trying to rein him in. Bakugo seemed to have adopted Mineta's proposed strategy. He snatched several eggs thanks to other teams pointing out where they were, and managed to grab at least one from someone else's hand. Midoriya had been relegated to pack mule, tossing all of their eggs into a makeshift bag he fashioned out of his sweater. It wasn't until Midoriya crumpled to his knees that Bakugo stopped his mad search. When Bakugo approached, he flinched out of habit. Breathing, he rasped, "Sorry? Kaken, can't breathe. So tired. Sorry." Midoriya saw Bakugo lift his hand and he shut his eyes in anticipation of the slap or the punch or whatever Kaken deemed appropriate for his weakness. Instead, he felt knuckles gently brush against his jawline. Opening his eyes, he saw a soft kindness in Bakugo's face that he hadn't seen in years. As quickly as it had appeared, the small hope that Bakugo would be nice disappeared, and he stood up in a huff. "Forgot you weren't cut out for this physical sheet, Deku? Now come on, let's turn in those eggs." Hadu squealed as Midoriya dumped all of their eggs in front of her. "Lots of points for the 4th floor here," she exclaimed. As she started tallying up the points, with Bakugo close by so she didn't miscount, Midoriya drifted through the front doors. From the idle chatter on the dorm patio, it seemed like most of the eggs had been found. From not too far away, he heard Ida call his name. Chopping the air with his arms, Ida shouted, "Where have you 2 been? We've been trying to contact you." "Huh," Midoriya said, confused. He took out his phone and was surprised to see a great many notifications from the Artagnan chat app. "Oops," he said sheepishly. Ida turned to the group of people surrounding them and Midoriya realized that the rest of the floor was here. He unlocked his phone and read the last message in the 4th floor conversation. 4th floor. 10 minutes. Tenyu Ida, we need to meet in front of the dorm ASAP. Bring your eggs back now. Surreptitiously, Midoriya pocketed his phone. In a hushed, urgent voice, Ida explained, "We are sitting at 74. The girls have 260 and the 2nd floor has 243. The rest of the boys grimaced. After doing some quick mental math, Midoriya piped up, "Actually, with the eggs Kaken and I brought in, We should be up to 180. Dude, that's awesome. Zero congratulated. But that still puts us in last place, growled Ojiro. There's still hope, Ida reassured them. No one's found the golden egg yet. We find it and victory is ours. Kirishima punched the air. Great. He picked up a small stick and drew a square in the dirt. Now, where did everyone search? The boys looked at him like he was a madman. Pointing at the square, Sato asked, "What is that?" Kirishima huffed. "It's the dorm, duh." He started drawing a curve from the square, explaining, "I ran over here, found some eggs, met up with Kaminari and Zero here dash." He drew an X, and then I dash. Flatly, Tokoyami pointed out, "Kirishima, no one is going to be able to follow this." Ida pushed his glasses up and started tapping his phone. "Okay, I'll bring up a map of the campus dash." Shuji raised his hand. "Yeah, about that, I'm not too sure where I was at any point." For the second time that night, the fourth-floor boys started bickering. Midoriya groaned. He sincerely hoped that the rest of the year wouldn't be like this. Red and white flashed in his peripheral vision. He searched the area and, to his surprise, found Todoroki standing away from the rest of the group. Midoriya smiled and waved at him as he approached. Todoroki only blinked at him, keeping his arms folded. "Hey," Midoriya greeted. "Hey, what a professional conversationalist." Then again, Midoriya supposed he wasn't much better. "So I thought you weren't going to do this egg hunt thingy?" "I wasn't," admitted Todoroki. "But then he dragged me downstairs." He motioned to Ida and Midoriya snorted. "He is." Midoriya paused to find a word that succinctly described the boy clamoring for order and strategy. "Over the top?" offered Todoroki. Midoriya giggled. "I was gonna say eager, but that works too." He turned to smile at his roommate and noticed that he was trembling ever so slightly. But why would he be trembling? Midoriya found his answer when the wind picked up and Todoroki hugged himself tighter. "Wait, you're cold, aren't you?" He extended his arms, offering him his sweater. Todoroki's eyes widened, as if he'd never seen a sweater before. He cast his eyes down and muttered, "I'm fine, thank you." Midoriya took a small step forward. "Todoroki dash." From behind him came a familiar voice screaming, "Deku, you useless F dash." Midoriya yelped and leapt about a foot into the air. A fist grabbed the front of his shirt and whirled him around. Bakugo's war face would never cease to scare him. "Stop FNG around with this half-and-half loser, we need to find that FNG gold egg." Bakugo released him and sprinted off in one direction, all the while spouting curses at the other floors. Midoriya turned to Todoroki, who seemed unfazed at all the screaming. Sighing, he said, "Sorry about Kaken." Expression unchanged, Todoroki asked, "Is F dash his favorite word?" Midoriya couldn't help but laugh. "Probably." He stepped closer and held out the sweater once more. "The game doesn't end until we find this golden egg, and that might take a while. Please, Todoroki. Take it?" Hesitantly, Todoroki took the sweater into his hands, studying it closely. His mismatched eyes made contact with Midoriya's own. "But why?" he asked. "Why?" Midoriya repeated, confused. "You're cold and I want to help. Stay warm until we get back, okay?" Picking a direction at random, he jogged off before Todoroki could object. Todoroki stared after his roommate, his shaking hands still clutching the green knit sweater. For 10 minutes. Tenuita, everyone please try to remember your assigned locations. Denki Kaminari, nothing in the quad so far. Yugoyama, nothing in the art district. Yugoyama, wait. Yugo-Oyama, NVM just part of an installation. 7 minutes. Mezushuji, not near the gym. Ijuku Kirishima, hey, can someone get to the med district? Tenuita, did you find the Ijuku Kirishima, no, Bakugo is stuck in a tree. Tenuita, what? 5 minutes. Ijuku Kirishima, NVM he landed on my neta, we good. 3 minutes. Fumikage Tokoyami, someone found the egg. Return to the dorm. Hantasiro, please tell me someone from our floor found it. Hantasiro, please. Tenuita, if you have found the egg, please reply. Mezushuji, we lost, didn't we? Katsuki Bakugo, motherfuck. Tenuita, watch your language. Katsuki Bakugo, No. One by one, the boys of the fourth floor returned to Aramis Hall, slumped over in defeat. Some looked worse than others. Aoyama was somehow still sparkling, Ida was flushed and drenched in sweat, both Bakugo and Midoriya had dirt smears on their faces, knees, and elbows in addition to sporting some leaves and twigs in their hair, and an out-of-breath Kirishima was carrying a slightly delirious Mineta. They figured he was mildly concussed. When a happy, bouncing Hadu approached them, they thought nothing of it. Perhaps she was here to give some consolation speech. Instead, she cheered, "Congratulations, fourth floor." "What?" asked Zero, not quite comprehending her words. Hadu smiled. "You guys found the golden egg and won the whole shebang." "What?" Zero repeated, energy returning to his voice. Ida also straightened up and started wildly gesturing. "Hadu, which of us brought it to you?" Still beaming, she pointed her thumb over her right shoulder at an unassuming boy with dual-toned hair and a very fetching green sweater. "Todoroki!" the entire group cried. They surged forward to greet their hero. Kirishima, Kaminari, and Zero all hugged him and started chanting "Bro." Ida clasped his hand and shook it vigorously, and Shuji ruffled his hair so that the line between red and white was a fuzzy mess. Most everyone else was hopping around and cheering. The only boys who weren't celebrating were Mineta, who was carried away to receive medical attention, Bakugo, who simply shoved his hands back into his pockets and started glaring at Todoroki, and Midoriya, who was more amused at his roommate's unchanging expression. Kaminari slapped Todoroki on the back. "So Todoroki, how'd you find it?" Sata added. "Yeah, we must have searched all of campus twice." The boys fell silent as they turned their attention to their savior. Todoroki rubbed his cheek with his forefinger and began, in his quiet voice, "Well?" Todoroki didn't know how long he stood there, staring after his roommate. What was his ultimate goal in lending him a sweater? Growing up, he had learned that if someone did something for you, it meant that they wanted a favor from you later. But Midoriya had been doing an awful lot for him. What could he possibly want from a monster? The wind picked up again, chilling him to the bone. Well, if he had a sweater now. Todoroki slipped it on and was surprised at how nicely it fit him. Not too tight, not too baggy, and the sleeves were just long enough for him to cover his palms, his ideal sweater size. He padded along the patio, listening to the shouts and cries of his neighbors in the distance. They sounded like they were having fun. Maybe he should run off into the night and join them. "Hey, half and half, how about you tell us how you got that scar?" He frowned. As much as he wanted to go out there, he didn't want to run into Bakugo again. Come to think of it, Midoriya had defended him then. How many favors was he going to owe his roommate? Lost in thought, he idly ran his fingers along an ornamental lion statue in front of the dorm. A small thump near his foot startled him back into reality. Looking down, he saw a small, round stone. He picked it up and realized that he had dislodged it from the lion's mouth on accident. Reaching out, he placed it back into the lion's mouth and paused. This lion statue was made of a dark metal. If this stone in its mouth was truly part of the statue, why was it stone instead of the same metal material? Todoroki turned around and saw that this lion statue was part of a pair. Two lions sitting on either side of the front doors, sitting and growling majestically. The other lion also had something in its mouth that was not the same material as the rest of the statue. He shuffled closer and saw that this lion had a round, golden egg. He took it gingerly and studied it. Was this the thing everyone was so desperately looking for? Hadu answered his question when she hopped up behind him and started cheering. "Wow, I thought someone would never find it." Amajiki, who had heard the commotion, walked over and buried his face in his hands upon realizing why Hadu was squealing. "Seriously?" He sighed. "You hid it here?" Everyone's jaw had dropped. The silence was deafening. Kirishima was the first one to speak. "Seriously? It was here at the dorm this entire time?" Tokoyami rubbed his temples. "Hadu and Amajiki must think us all fools." Ida was rubbing his chin. "Hidden in plain sight, huh? I see. This must have been some sort of test with some sort of lesson." Midoriya stepped forward, as did Todoroki. "That was awesome, Todoroki." He congratulated. The corners of Todoroki's mouth rose ever so slightly. Was that a smile? Even if it wasn't, Midoriya still counted it as such. He continued, "And hey, this sweater fits you a lot better than it ever fit me. You can totally borrow it anytime you get cold." His roommate responded by breaking eye contact and rubbing his cheek some more. And was he turning red? What the F ever? All eyes turned to Bakugo, who once again had his war face on. He sneered, "You're still a freak." Instinctively, Midoriya moved to shield Todoroki. Cack and dash. Bakugo drove his palm into Midoriya's chest, sending him toppling backwards. The other boy braced himself to hit the ground and was instead met with a pair of arms catching him around his middle. He glanced up to see Todoroki staring down Bakugo, looking slightly angrier than his usual unaffected self. This seemed to fuel Bakugo's flames further. "Don't you cacken me, you useless Deku," he growled as he sulked off. Behind them, Kaminari whispered to Kirishima, "Dude, what is your angry roommate's deal?" Tenida, congratulations all on a well-earned victory. Tenida, especially Bakugo, Midoriya, and Todoroki. Ampere, Boi Todoroki coming in clutch. Tenuida, now hold on just a minute. Tenuida, this is a private chatroom. Tenida, who are you, Ampere? Ampere, dude, Ida chill, it's Kaminari. Hantasiro, wait, what, we can change our usernames. Hantasiro is now Spider-Bro. Spider-Bro, dude, game singing after text. We're equipped to steer the ship till this trippy skit ends, and by the end of this song, we'll be best friends. Secondary characters, title of show. 3 Aramis Hall. Ampere, hey guys who went around posting our usernames on our doors. Spider-Bro, yeah, I figured it was obvious who everyone was. Tenebri, Hadu and Amajiki got very confused very fast. Spider-Bro, wait, hold up, who are you? Tenebri. 403. Yuga Aoyama, XX__Skirksex. Kuji Kuda, Bun Bun. It was very difficult to focus on anything when Aoyama began talking. And if he was practicing for an audition in a few weeks, well, Kuda had given up reading over his syllabuses long ago and was instead watching his roommate prance madly around the room. Kuda had never heard of the play Arsenic and Old Lace, but all of Aoyama's exaggerated inflections and movements indicated that it was a comedy. At least, he hoped it was a comedy, otherwise, the audition would be quite awkward. Aoyama was so busy leaping around the room he hadn't even noticed he had a captive audience. To Kuda's surprise, his roommate stopped mid-sentence and locked eyes with him. "Oh, Kuda, you've been watching," he proclaimed. "How am I doing?" Kuda smiled and nodded his head. "Excellent." He rummaged through his book bag and pulled out a small booklet. Handing it to Kuda, he asked, "Hey, can you help me with the audition scene? It's highlighted in yellow." Kuda nodded and cracked open the script. He was very thankful that Aoyama had specified that it was highlighted in yellow. The rest of the script was marked all over in various shades of neon highlighter. Kuda's eyes burned as he flipped through the pages, finally arriving at a section near the beginning of the script. Aoyama added, "If you'd like to get in character, you'll be reading from my 2 sweet, elderly aunts. I am your young nephew, come home." Kuda nodded quietly. Mustering up his best old lady voice, he began reading, "Mortimer, why have you suddenly turned against Teddy? Your own brother?" Aoyama curled his hands into fists and stamped his foot. "You've got to know sometime, and it might as well be now." Teddy's dash. Aoyama bit into one of his fists, as if debating whether or not to reveal that Teddy's killed a man. Kuda snorted as he adjusted a pair of imaginary reading glasses. "Nonsense, dear." Aoyama groaned loudly and pointed at their window. "There's a body in the window seat." "Yes, dear, we know." It was at this point that Kuda lost it. Howling with laughter, he read through the rest of the scene. The character of Mortimer had just realized that his 2 aunts had been poisoning strangers with wine. The humor came from Mortimer's terrified, over-the-top reaction, and his aunts acting like murdering a total of 12 old men was nothing to freak out about. Aoyama was also laughing. "You know, this is the most sound I've heard you make," he pointed out gleefully. Kuda immediately shut his mouth and blushed, but still couldn't hold back his smile. "If I get the part of Mortimer, will you come see the play?" Kuda nodded enthusiastically. 408. Minoru Mineta, bunch of grapes. Mezu Shuji, no 6. Shuji had always thought that Mineta was a little odd, but ever since Bakugo gave him that concussion he'd gotten odder. Well, to begin with, there was his weird purple bun hair. The first time they had met, Shuji had compared them to Ball. Mineta, through some bizarre thought process, assumed he was being called gay and took offense, and his suspicious insistence that he was straight. But he was also a philosophy major. Maybe the weirdness could be attributed to that. Shuji wished he could go back to those relatively innocent days. Almost overnight, Mineta had stockpiled stacks upon stacks of magazines and stored them under his bed. Shuji almost went to see exactly what he was purchasing, but thought to respect his roommate's privacy. Despite his vow, Shuji thought he glimpsed a nurse on one of the front covers. He assumed that they were medical magazines, with information on how to help with post-concussion symptoms. Yes, that had to be it. Mineta was also perpetually on his laptop, with his headphones plugged in. Shuji happily assumed that he was getting a head start on his schoolwork while conveniently ignoring the fact that his roommate no longer seemed to wear breathes in their room. Shuji's convenient lies shattered a few days later. He had entered the room fairly late at night, tired from football practice and just wanting to go to bed. Their room was completely dark except from the light coming from Mineta's laptop screen. His roommate had his headphones on and was facing away from him, so Shuji's entrance went unnoticed. What didn't go unnoticed was what Mineta was watching on his laptop and the fact that he didn't seem to have clothes on. Shuji quietly shut the door and pressed his palms into his closed eyes, willing himself to forget the image. This was way too awkward now. He could not live with Mineta after discovering his pawn preferences. Groaning, he turned around and knocked on the first door he saw. 405. Denki Kaminari, Ampere. Hanta Siro, Spider Bro. It was as if two twin brothers, separated long ago, had been reunited. Well, except that he and Siro looked nothing alike, but Kaminari still thought the comparison was pretty accurate. In grade school, Kaminari had always been the weird kid. The nice, weird kid, but still kind of weird. He had been told more than once to dial back his zaniness or else he would lose the few friends he had. But Siro? His new bro was like him, except zanier, and it was the greatest thing ever. Both of them were engineering majors, and shared the same class schedule. Both of them wanted to rush the same fraternity. Kaminari made a mental note to ask Kirishima whether or not he was rushing, and both of them played Overwatch. They were even the same rank, so they could buddy up. And currently, both of them were working on a Rube Goldberg contraption to wake them up for their morning classes. A pair of normal roommates would just set a few alarm clocks, but as it turned out, both Kaminari and Siro were immune to the usual beeping and blaring of alarms. Kaminari had hooked up one of his spare microcontroller boards to a cheap digital clock. Once the clock struck 7:30 in the morning, it would send a signal via Bluetooth to Siro's contraptions above each of their beds. Suspended on a net and 4 hooks were several beanbags, hard enough to wake them up, but soft enough to not harm them. Once the signal was received, the hooks would release, sending the net and beanbags onto their sleeping bodies, waking them up. Hopefully. Kaminari turned to his roommate and grinned. Ready to test it? Siro tapped all of the hooks to make sure the duct tape was secure. Giving him a thumbs up, he said, "Release the beanbags, bro." Kaminari manually set the clock to 7:30 a.m. The board attached to the clock lit up, the 2 smaller boards attached to the hooks flickered to life in response, and the 2 nets were released, pelting the beds with beanbags. The 2 boys high-fived and cheered in unison. Best bro ever. 407. Mashareo Ojiro, Sunmukong. Rikidu Satu, Sugar Rush. The contents of a room's refrigerator can say a lot about its occupants. For example, the refrigerator in room 407 contains Greek yogurt, fresh fruit, protein shakes, and luncheon meats, but also chocolate milk, ice cream, several cupcakes, and for some reason, straight-up liquefied sugar. Ojiro cracked open the fridge to grab a post-workout protein shake and frowned at the sheer amount of sweets. Sighing, he called, "Hey Sat, you eat things other than sugar, right?" "Well duh," his roommate answered, rolling his eyes. "I eat 3 proper meals a day. The sugar's for all the other times I'm hungry." Dryly, Ojiro muttered, "How are you alive?" Satu folded his arms. Well, maybe you're a grump because you don't eat enough sugar. Ojiro rubbed his temples. Satu, you have liquefied sugar in the fridge. Liquefied? Sugar? Why? Satu shrugged. That's glaze, and it's a great topping for cinnamon rolls and cupcakes. Ojiro opened his mouth to argue for the benefits of a balanced diet, but was interrupted by a knocking on the door. Silently fuming, he crossed the room to open the door. Shuji? He only called on Ojiro when he needed a workout buddy, but he had messaged him earlier about having football practice. He asked, Shuji? What's wrong? The football player seemed very nervous and very tired. Scratching the back of his head, Shuji said, some things came up with my roommate. Is it okay if I crash here until I get things worked out with him? Satu approached the doorway. Your room, Kay, it's that scrawny philosophy major, right? Why don't we go iron that out right now? Ojiro agreed, wanting to avoid a diet debate. Amidst protests from Shuji, the two crossed the hallway and cracked open Shuji's door. Almost immediately, they shut it again. Ojiro was at a loss for words. Satu whimpered, Look man, I dunno what you saw in there the first time, but I think he had a body pillow or a sec doll in there or something. Shuji's face, already looking nauseated, morphed into pure revulsion. Ojiro led Shuji back into his room. Stay as long as you want, buddy, he offered. 302. Mina Ishido, Alien Queen. Toru Hagakure, Wallflower. Stretching out on her fuzzy, hot pink bedsheets, Ishido idly scrolled through the Artagnan chat rooms. Announcements from Arace, a get-together later on in the dining hall, an open invitation to play Overwatch. Ooh, she made a mental note of that one. Who did she need to contact? Ampere and Spider-Bro? Alright, a heated debate over who Tenebrae was, everything except what she was looking for, her roommate. She was supposed to have moved in a few days ago. Her stuff was all here, but Ishido had never actually seen Hagakure. Sighing, she typed into the chat. Alien Queen, hey, has anyone seen Toru Hagakure? An offended-sounding voice from inside the room chimed, Ishido, I'm right here. She bolted upright and screamed, wildly searching the room. Haunted dorm room, she shrieked. Haunted, Hagakure, are you a ghost? Oh my god, did they give me a ghost roommate? Ishido. From out of nowhere, a plain-looking girl with gray eyes and brown hair approached her bed and gripped her shoulders. Ishido, it's me. I'm Hagakure. Face frozen in an abashed smile, Ishido greeted, Hi there. Hagakure. Nice to meet you. When did you get in? Hagakure released Ishido's shoulders and suddenly looked very downcast. I've been here the entire time. Here? Ishido repeated. She gestured wildly around the room. Where? On my bed. I've been trying to get your attention this whole time. For the past few days, actually. Ishido turned a deep shade of crimson. I'm sorry. Wait, so the trash can being emptied, my towel hanging on the hook all proper like, my bed being made when I get back from breakfast, that was all you? Solemnly, Hagakure nodded her head. Wailing, Ishido rose and wrapped her arms around her roommate. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I never noticed you. She felt Hagakure's sigh on her shoulder. It's fine. I've gotten used to this sort of thing. Ishido pulled away, her arms still resting on Hagakure's shoulders. No. You shouldn't be used to being invisible. There had to be something she could do to make up for her horrid first impression. A grin spread across Ishido's face as inspiration struck. She declared, You, my wallflower roommate, are going to be popular. In contrast, Hagakure suddenly looked very afraid. She mumbled, I'm not sure I like where this is going. 303. Kyuko Gyre, Treble Maker. Momo Yaoyorozu, Peachy Keen. To be perfectly honest, Momo Yaoyorozu had been expecting someone better for her roommate. Her ideal roommate? One that shared one of her majors, ever ambitious, she was double majoring in architecture and materials engineering, one that took school as seriously as she did, one she could have intellectual conversations with, one that actually used the chore wheel. But no. She was stuck with Kyuko Gyru, music production major, who spent her free time DJing, playing games on her computer, and never ever picking up after herself, ever. Her mother had told her to mind her manners when she went to college. Not everyone came from the same lavish, high-class background. But still, was Artagnan scraping from the bottom of the barrel this year? Yaoyorozu looked up from her laptop and grimaced at Jiru's unmade bed, her clothes strewn everywhere, her dinner from last night still sitting on her desk. Oh Lord, she had left food sitting out all night. Grumbling, she took the now cold food and dumped it in the trash. She couldn't take much more of the mad mess in the room, so she went out and decided to pick up all of her textbooks. As it turned out, textbooks were very expensive. Glancing at her bank account summary, Yaoyorozu frowned. Her parents had agreed to covering her tuition and textbooks, but that was it. She would have to earn her own money for food, gas, and leisure. Maybe there was somewhere near campus that was offering a part-time job. She entered a small cafe a few blocks away called Café de Winter. After looking around the small town square, it was evident to Yaoyorozu that this was the only coffee shop in the town, or at least within walking distance of the campus. Making note of the help wanted sign in the window, she walked to the counter to order a coffee. Ma'am? She called hesitantly. Yes, ma'am? The barista paused in making a drink order and turned around. Oh, it's you. Yaoyorozu nearly dropped her books. Jiru? With a flick of her wrist, Jiru topped the drink with some whipped cream and passed it to another worker. Sauntering over to the order counter, Jiru chuckled, So, what'll it be, cupcake? Yaoyorozu seemed to spontaneously forget every single word in the English language. Her mouth hung open, but no words passed her lips. Jiru, on the other hand, propped herself up on the counter with a dry grin on her face. Jiru glanced around, as if checking for witnesses. Finding none, she whispered sarcastically, Here to make fun of the working class, princess? That brought Yaoyorozu back to reality. What? She hissed. I am not like that. Her mother's voice came unbidden into her mind. Not everyone comes from this sort of money, my princess. Sheepishly, she covered her mouth with her hand and muttered, Have I been acting like that? Oh God, I'm so sorry. Jiru laughed. I'm kidding, cupcake. But you should probably stop acting all high and mighty. As her roommate walked away to prepare another drink, Yaoyorozu cried, Wait, I've been acting high and mighty? She couldn't see her face while she was turned around making the drink, but somehow, Yaoyorozu knew that Jiru was smiling. Jiru returned with the drink, saying, Just a little bit. Smiling, she pushed the drink towards Yaoyorozu. But I never ordered, she protested weakly. Jiru drummed her fingers on the counter. That's on the house, she explained. Think of it as an apology for having to look at my side of the room all the time. Now go, there's a line behind you now. Flustered, she took the drink and sat down at the nearest table. She brought the cup to her lips and oh wow, this was one of the best peppermint mochas she'd ever had. She supposed money couldn't buy everything. Glancing back up at Jiru, she found that. Setting her cup down roughly, Yaoyorozu called, Jiru, there was no line behind me. From behind the counter, she could hear the melody of Jiru's laugh. 301. Tsuyu Azui, Karapi. Ochako Uraraka, Space Angel. If someone had told Uraraka that waking up to frogs on her face would be a frequent occurrence in college, she would never believe them, not in a million years. And yet, that morning she could only open her left eye. Something slick and rib-biting was obscuring the right half of her face. Without batting an eye, she gently lifted the frog and called, Azui. Her roommate shifted in her bed, barely awake. Uraraka, I told you. All right, so Azui's request to be called by a nickname was a simple one, but somehow, Uraraka kept forgetting. Anyway, one of them got loose again. I think Uraraka shifted her hand over so she could see the small animal more clearly. Which one is the albino one? Hang on, Morgana got out. Azui rose from her bed and crossed the room, gingerly taking the albino frog in her hands. She's not the escape Y type. As Azui went to put Morgana back in the frog tank, Uraraka rolled over, desperate for a few more minutes of sleep. Her attempts were foiled by some distressed croaking and two small, slippery lumps on the other side of her pillow. Groaning loudly, she sat up and took the other two frogs in her hands. Sue, how many frogs got out last night? Azui counted the frogs present in the tank before answering. Looks like 3 more got out. I'm sorry, Uraraka. She sighed. Well, I've got 2 of them with me. Do you see the third dash? Uraraka was cut off by a scream in the hallway. Azui was at the door faster than Uraraka expected. One of the other girls, Ashido it sounded like, had stumbled upon the third frog. Apologizing profusely, she came back into their room with the last escapee. The 2 girls placed the frogs gently back into the tank. Azui tried to secure the mesh top, but one of the clasps, already on its last legs, broke off. That's probably how they're getting out. I'm sorry, she sighed. Uraraka wrapped an arm gently around Azui's shoulders. No worries. You know, I have my car on campus. We can see if there's a pet store around and you can buy a new cover. She rubbed her chin thoughtfully. Or, you know, I am an engineering major, maybe I can replace this clasp? Azui returned Uraraka's gesture and rested her head against her roommate's. Thank you, Uraraka. Actually, you can totally call me Ochako, she said with a smile. 402. Katsuki Bakugo, Mass Destruction. Iger Kirishima, Prometheus. College was definitely a new experience for Bakugo. Throughout grade school, he'd made himself top dog by punching people until everyone got the message. Once he was at the top, no one FE'd with him and no one FE'd with useless Deku for fear of FNG with him. Maybe he was punching the wrong guys. Kirishima barged into the room and greeted him with a cheery, "Hey there, Bakugo." He responded by socking him in the jaw. Instead of wailing or shrinking back or otherwise reacting like a normal person, Kirishima guffawed. Dude, are we greeting each other with punches now? Awesome. Playfully, he punched Bakugo's bicep. Yeah, he was definitely punching the wrong guys. Bakugo studied his roommate's ever-beaming face before growling, "What the F is wrong with you?" Kirishima tilted his head. What do you mean? A frustrated Bakugo sputtered incoherently before explaining, I dunno, like normal people cry or scream at me or, I dunno, go get the cops when I punch them. How the F are you so happy? Kirishima snorted. I pride myself in taking hits like a man. He pounded his chest with one of his fists. And you don't pull any of your punches either. You just get up and go for sheet. I like that. Bakugo was dumbfounded. Someone who didn't mind his violent tendencies? Someone who actually liked them? The thought warmed the cockles of his black heart. Wait, was that an emotion? That noise. He willed it away as he punched Kirishima's arm. Kirishima laughed again. Hey, you know that green, fluffy boy, right? Deku? Okay. He was back to hating Kirishima's stupid, perpetually happy face. He spat, what about useless effing Deku? Kirishima shrugged innocently. I dunno, it seemed like you guys knew each other from high school or something. He suddenly perked up and pointed his thumb at their door. Hey, he lives across the hall, you wanna go and say hi? Bakugo's hands curled into fists. And why the ever-loving F would I want to say hi to that useless sheet? Kirishima scratched his head. So, you aren't friends? Bakugo punched him in the gut, harder than he had ever punched someone. Maybe this would show him who was boss. Instead, he lifted up his shirt while coughing his lungs out and smiled. Dude, he rasped. I think that'll leave a bruise. I'll wear it as a badge of pride. Bakugo groaned and buried his face in his hands. This was going to be a very long year. 404. Tenya Ida, Turbo Boost. Fumikage Tokoyami, Tenebri. Who are you, Tenebri? Tokoyami rolled his eyes at the chat message. He was surrounded by fools. Putting his phone away, he took out his book and began reading. With the king of the fools for his roommate, silence was a gift from the gods. He should enjoy it before. The door slammed open and a sweaty Ida greeted, Good morning, Tokoyami. Without glancing up from his book, Tokoyami grumbled, Do you have to be so loud? You're almost as bad as Lord Explosion Murder next door. As if on cue, they could hear Bakugo yelling through the surprisingly thin wall. I am not as bad as him. Ida countered, sounding offended. To Tokoyami's relief, he did lower his volume. Anyway, are you sure you won't join me for my morning runs? They really are quite refreshing, and you seem to spend a lot of time indoors. Lazily, Tokoyami turned the page. I'm fine, thank you. Ida sighed and started changing out of his running clothes. Well, maybe start reading outside? Some sunlight and fresh air should do you some good. I'll pass. Ida opened his mouth as if to reprimand him again, but his attention quickly turned to his track breathes. Fumbling through the pockets, he asked, "Hey Tokoyami, did I drop my room key somewhere?" He marked his place with the black feather and shut his book. "Your room key?" he repeated. "Wait, then how did you get in? Did you lock the door like I asked you to when I left?" Was that what he had said? Tokoyami supposed he should stop pretending he was listening whenever Ida started speaking. "Well," he muttered. Ida turned to glare at him, angrily placing his hands on his hips. Tokoyami had to stifle a snicker. He really did act like a mother sometimes. "Tokoyami, what if Ida spotted something on the windowsill and gasped comically. "Fumigage Tokoyami, do you want bugs? Because this is how we get bugs," he yelled, pointing at the fruit next to the open window. Tokoyami paled. He was usually here before Ida finished his run. Did something happen to him? As Ida marched across the room to clean it up, he meekly said, "Ida, don't take the fruit, it's there for a reason dash." "What reason?" Ida sternly asked. As he reached out to take the fruit, a raven landed on the windowsill. It cawed reproachfully at Ida's hand before pecking at its breakfast. Tokoyami sighed in relief. "Tokoyami," Ida hissed. "Why is there a crow on our windowsill?" Tokoyami rolled his eyes. "Tsukuyami is a raven, you uneducated, oh whatever." He rose to his feet and approached the raven, who hopped forward and offered its head for Tokoyami to slide. What was this mysterious thing tangled in its talons? As Tokoyami delicately untangled whatever this thing was, Ida kept inquiring, "Fumigage Tokoyami, why are you friends with a raven?" "He's nice and a very good boy," he curtly replied. Holding up a key on a braided cord lanyard, he dryly asked, "Looking for this, Ida?" Speechless, his roommate gingerly took the key from his hands. "Chow?" The raven cawed triumphantly. Folding his arms, Tokoyami said, "You're lucky Tsukuyami's taken a liking to you." 401. Izuku Midoriya, Midorito. Shudo Todoroki Sho. Midoriya knew that his relationship with his roommate wouldn't be magically mended because of a lone sweater and some kind words. But he thought it had been going somewhere. He was proven wrong when he woke up the next morning in a puddle of his own sweat. Sitting up, he noticed two things. One, that his sweater was neatly folded at the foot of his bed, and two, that Todoroki was sitting up, huddled in his own blankets again. As he got up to adjust the thermostat, he sighed, "You know, I was serious when I said you could borrow my sweater if you got cold." To compensate for the lower temperature, Midoriya took the sweater and the throw blanket and set them on Todoroki's bed. His roommate ignored the offerings and simply said, "I don't want to owe you any more favors." "Favors?" Midoriya repeated. He sat on the edge of his bed, facing Todoroki. "What are you talking about?" Todoroki's mismatched eyes fell on him and suddenly, Midoriya felt uneasy. He had never been very good at reading people. Trying to read his roommate was like trying to guess what was behind a locked door. Finally, he lowered his eyes and asked in a soft voice, "Why else would you keep being nice to me?" Midoriya was taken aback. Something felt off about the way he said that, some sort of emotion that gave it an edge, but for the life of him, Midoriya couldn't put his finger on it. He chose his next words carefully. "Because, Todoroki, I want to be your friend." He sighed. "But the only friend I've ever had is Kaken, so I'm sorry if I'm bad at it." Todoroki studied him again, but for a shorter PRD of time. He asked, "So? I don't owe you anything?" "No." "Well, I'd like your friendship, but if you don't want to, then I guess I have to live with it, literally." Against his will, Midoriya began gesturing in an Ida-like fashion. "Because, you know, we're living together and I thought we should be at least on friendly terms dash." Todoroki snorted and, yep, Midoriya was still counting that subtle movement as a smile. "Please don't start muttering." The smallest smile disappeared and he took out his laptop from his blanket cocoon. Where on earth did that come from, Midoriya wondered. "Can I ask you something, Midoriya?" He leaned forward. "Yeah, anything." Todoroki turned his laptop around. Midoriya had to step forward to see what was on the screen. His heart stopped when he realized it was a very specific medical article. Evidently, Todoroki had assumed he'd never seen it before and explained, 10 years ago, Dr. Toshinori Yagi developed some sort of super enhancement procedure and tested it first on himself, then on a child. None of the medical journals I've found give any details other than the procedure having a life-changing effect on the child, so the details must be top secret, or at the very least, closely guarded by Dr. Yagi. I've heard rumors that he took up a research professor post here when he learned that the child was coming to Artagnan. Would you happen to know who it is? Midoriya shifted his weight. I'm not sure, Todoroki. I mean, there are like 27 guys in this dorm alone. And if it's not any of them, we'd have to go around finding all the first-year guys dash. Todoroki smirked. You know who it is? Neither I nor this article mentioned the gender of the child. Midoriya sighed, accepting defeat. Yeah. Dr. Yagi's patient, it's me? Apparently, the revelation that small, useless Midoriya was part of an experimental medical procedure blindsided Todoroki. He seemed to lose his composure and barely managed to stutter. Why you? As his fingers curled into fists, he firmly repeated, yeah, Todoroki. Me. He wasn't sure where Todoroki was going to do with this information, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to know. Wordlessly, he crossed the room and grabbed a photograph from the drawer on his nightstand. Despite not looking at it for several years, the image was still burned into Midoriya's memory. Besides his mother, Bakugo, and Dr. Yagi, no one knew about this part of his life. Was he really going to trust Todoroki with this? He was turning around, he said, Look, I don't know what you think the formula does. I don't have superpowers or anything like that. But it was life-changing. With shaking hands, he handed the photograph to Todoroki. His mismatched blue and gray eyes grew wide upon seeing the photograph. Midoriya didn't blame him. The boy in the picture was so emaciated, hooked up to so many machines, so bandaged up, except for the shock of emerald hair, no one could connect Midoriya to the little boy. I was a pretty frail kid. Always getting sick, always getting hurt, always breaking my fragile bones one way or another. Kaken would always joke around that I could catch a cold and it would probably kill me. It got less funny when it almost happened. Dr. Yagi was the only doctor around that would take a patient like me. He'd already developed some serums and procedures, all tested on himself. And I guess he, like everyone else, thought that I was gonna die soon anyway, so he didn't have much to lose and neither did I. He jumped through so many hoops trying to get my mom's permission, but as soon as she signed the papers, Midoriya gestured at himself. Normal kid. More or less. Silence fell over their room. Still staring at the photograph, Todoroki meekly asked, So, it's been perfected? Midoriya started wringing his hands together. Not quite, he admitted. I meet with Dr. Yagi every month. Run our vitals, fine-tune the formula based on side effects that he's experiencing so they don't affect me later, poke me full of needles. I actually had to take some gamma rays to the chest once. We're basically doing research on how to avoid our gruesome, early deaths. Todoroki finally tore his eyes away from the photograph and made eye contact with Midoriya. And you're not bitter? About being a medical guinea pig? The other boy shrugged. If it wasn't for Dr. Yagi, I would still be in that hospital bed. Or already dead. Our research is complicated and frustrating, and if we don't do it right, I might die anyway, but until then, I can be normal. I can go for a jog without passing out, I can high-five someone without breaking bones, I can catch a cold without dying. I think it's a fair price for a normal life. Considering the alternative, he took the photograph in his hands and stared at it, trailing off. Todoroki drew his knees up to his chest. You were a guinea pig for experimental medical procedures, but you're still happy? Well, that was an odd thought to take away from his tragic backstory. He scratched his head and answered, I guess so, yeah. His roommate reached for the blanket and sweater. Smiling again, he said, I think I'd like to get to know you more, Midoriya. He leaned forward, smiling. So does that mean I get to learn stuff about you too, Todoroki? Don't push it. As his roommate tried to settle back into indifference, Midoriya noticed that the smile never left his face, even as he shot him down. He decided to count it as a win. Who are you? Who? Who are you, the who? For. The residential assistant. Rain pitter-pattered on the window as dark clouds loomed over the town of Damas. There was no lightning or thunder quite yet, so Todoroki was content to lay in bed, listening to the soft white noise. Gentle rains like this reminded him of his mother and sister. On rainy days, Mama would take him and all of his siblings to the living area. The older kids would pick out books to read while Mama would read aloud to the smaller ones. More often than not, they ended up playing board games and his sister Fuyumi would make them each a mug of, "Hey Todoroki, I'm making hot cocoa. Do you want any? Hot cocoa." He cracked open one of his eyes and saw Midoriya sitting on the edge of his bed with 2 cocoa packets. Some paranoid, intrusive thought screamed that his roommate could read minds, but he pushed it away, calling it ridiculous. As Todoroki listened to the rain fall outside, he liked his lips and could almost taste the hot cocoa, could hear the quiet chattering of his older siblings, could feel the warmth of Mama's hugs. "No thank you," he replied quietly. He shut his eyes and willed himself not to think about his mother while Midoriya moved about to grab a mug. Their morning tranquility was abruptly ruined by Ida barging into their room and loudly greeting, "Good morning, my friends." Todoroki sat up, frowning, while Midoriya yelped and tossed the hot cocoa packet into the air. Comically, it landed in one of Ida's outstretched hands. In his other hand, "I have brought the official roommate agreements," he announced. A timid Midoriya padded across the room and took the form from Ida's hand. Todoroki begrudgingly got out of bed and started reading the paper from over his roommate's shoulder. Their eyes skimmed the document until Midoriya called, "Hey Ida, this says to turn it in to the RA. Do you know where he is?" They glanced up to see that Ida had already left and shut the door behind him. Through the closed door, they could hear another loud greeting from Ida and some creative swears from Bakugo. "He's not the RA?" Todoroki asked. When Midoriya shook his head, he sighed. "That's how he got me to go down to the egg hunt." Pulled the authority card. Midoriya snorted. "Oh Ida." The door suddenly burst open again, and Ida poked his head through the doorway and said, "Once you've filled it out, please return it to me. If you cannot find me in the lounge, you may slide it under my door." With that, the door shut again. Midoriya fiddled with the paper in his hands before saying, "Ida's a good guy and all, but maybe we should start locking our door." Dryly, Todoroki replied, "Yes. Please." Thankfully, filling out the roommate agreement was relatively painless. Both Midoriya and Todoroki picked up after themselves. Both of them were relatively quiet. Midoriya swore up and down that he would get his muttering under control, and both had enough sense to not bring over friends if the other was studying or sleeping. The only real problem they ran into was the ambient temperature. After much deliberation, Todoroki agreed to keep the temperature at 72 if he could borrow the sweater or any of Midoriya's blankets when needed. With the completed agreement in hand, Midoriya meandered through the hallway to the lounge, where Ida was furiously marking up his physics textbook. He managed to get a peek at one of the pages. Any important equations were highlighted in blue boxes, vocabulary words highlighted in pink, and extra notes and practical applications were scribbled in the margins. "Wow," Midoriya breathed. "Getting a head start?" Ida simply guffawed. "More like a refresher. All of this was basically my physics course senior year." He turned the page and Midoriya was frightened to see that most of the equations on this page incorporated the Greek alphabet. Midoriya whistled. "Glad I just have to take general physics?" He finally remembered what he was here for and held out the form. "Hey, by the way, we finished this thing." The offering pulled Ida out of his note-taking trance. He set his book and pencil case down on the table and eagerly took the agreement form. His eyes traveled down the page while he muttered, "Yes, yes, excellent." He stood so abruptly Midoriya nearly fell backwards from the motion. "Thank you for filling this out promptly," he declared. Ida marched off towards his room, but upon hearing someone knocking on the RA's door, turned his head so fast Midoriya was surprised he didn't get whiplash. Pivoting on one of his legs, he changed direction and called, "Kaminari and Siro. I believe I said to return the form to me." The two boys looked very confused. Siro pointed to the door plaque stating, "Residential Assistant," and said, "Isn't this your room?" Ida raised his arms mechanically and lightly karate chopped the tops of their heads. "My room is number 404. It has my name on it, he explained matter-of-factly. Groaning and rubbing his head, Kaminari handed Ida their form. With another odd, affirmative gesture, Ida turned around and continued on towards his room. As Midoriya headed to the bathroom, he saw Kaminari and Shiro aggressively whispering to each other and gesturing at the RA's room. He couldn't make out what they were saying, but he could probably guess what they were talking about. Sun Wukong, hey Ida, can you answer your door? I have a question. Turbo Boost, which door are you knocking on? Sun Wukong, the one that says RA? Turbo Boost, for the last time, my room is number 404. Prometheus, wait, I thought you were the RA. Prometheus, I put the paper under the RA door. Turbo Boost, why are you people so incompetent? Tenebris, why are you pretending to be the RA and confusing everyone? Turbo Boost. Turbo Boost, Fumikage Tokoyami returned to the room and apologized to me right now. A few days earlier, Uvinde. Shoyuda Aizawa rubbed his temples and groaned. He never asked to be made a residential director. The thought of babysitting 40 freshmen, well, 40 freshmen and Finji Nijire had made him want to curl up in his sleeping bag and never come out again. What he hated the most, though, was the paperwork involved. Luckily, most of it had been finished, all of the required forms for the new residents were sorted and neatly paperclipped. He swiveled in his office chair and grimaced at the stack of papers on the other side of his desk. Now to take care of this mess. He would have to deal with one of his RAs deciding to go study abroad at the last possible minute. There were just barely enough applicants last year. There was no one on the wait list and no one to transfer to fill in the empty spot. He'd have to go dig up all of the blank applicant forms, post the opening on the campus job site, plan interviews. Aizawa was thankful for the knock at his door. He wasn't sure how much longer he could deal with this missing RA business. He was greeted by a tall, loud boy in glasses. The boy boldly asked, "Hello, Mr. Director. If I may ask, who is the RA for the 4th floor? I've been knocking on his door, but he doesn't seem to be around." Aizawa sincerely hoped the hopeless frustration taking over him was not showing on his face. Willing himself to sound cheerier and more confident than he was, he explained, "Well, the 4th floor doesn't have one right now. I was going to have the 2nd floor RA cover while we found a replacement dash." The boy gasped. It was almost comical how overdramatic he sounded. "What a calamity," he hissed, gesturing aggressively. "Do not bother the 2nd floor RA with this, Mr. Director. I will be the RA for the 4th floor until you find this replacement." With that he ran off, leaving Aizawa speechless in the doorway. After considering his options, he shrugged and sat back down at his desk. Mirio Togata had said that he would be coming back in the spring. He saw no reason to tell this new, eager boy to stop. Plus, he wouldn't have to worry about putting him on the payroll. What could possibly go wrong? It's a different point of view to you. You cannot see things that are different to me. And I can't understand why you cannot see the things I cannot see. Point of view, Blink 182. Vite parallels. Midoriya fell into a certain rhythm in his last few days before school started. He would wake up at 7, check that Todoroki wasn't shivering too badly, and admire the sunrise over the Dumas Hills for a few minutes before going to take his shower. At some point between his shower and his morning internet browse in the lounge, he would say hello to Ida and his morning jogging group, Ojiro, Shuji, an unwilling Satu, and a silently fuming Tokoyami. After he cleaned himself up, Ida would often sit and chat with Midoriya for a while, eventually inviting him to breakfast. Midoriya was careful not to divulge too many of his unpleasant grade school memories, but he learned a great many things about Ida. He was valedictorian and star of the track team in high school, as well as a decent bassoon player in the concert band. His older brother, the youngest research and development engineer at the Kobayashi Car Company, was his personal hero and the reason he was going into mechanical engineering. He was also quite adamant that Midoriya join the morning jogging group, but Midoriya decided to tell him a half-truth and say that he had a weak constitution. On days that Bakugo slept in, Midoriya and Ida would go find Uraraka and at Midoriya's request, make attempts to invite Todoroki to breakfast. The answer was usually no, but there was no harm in trying. It warmed Midoriya's small heart to find two new friends that weren't particularly put off by Bakugo's aggressiveness. The three ended up spending the rest of the day together, either in the first-floor lounge, strolling around town, or being shanghaied into one of Ciro and Kaminari's shenanigans. The most recent was a game of keep-away. The boys were hiding a badly wrapped package from Kirishima, and Midoriya was horrified when he realized it was one of Bakugo's shoes. He never did like other people stealing his things. Those wonderful days usually ended with pretty much the entire dorm, with a few notable exceptions, like Todoroki and Mineta, swarming one of the dining halls. Even with Bakugo breathing down his neck, Midoriya could still enjoy his friend's company. They just had to deal with sarcastic remarks, rude interruptions, and attacks on Midoriya's character. He thought they looked a little upset, but as long as they were all still on speaking terms, he supposed it wasn't too big of a problem. On days that Bakugo was actually awake before 9 o'clock, Midoriya's day would take a different turn. Bakugo would stomp out of his room, mumbling curses under his breath, and upon seeing Midoriya with Ida, he would start snarking or just straight up yelling at Ida. As usual, Ida would take the bait and get into a very loud argument with Bakugo. While the other residents emerged from their rooms to add to the angry clamor, Midoriya slipped back into his room, making sure to lock the door. Todoroki stared at the door balefully, but his face softened when Midoriya offered a small apologetic smile. The rest of the day would be spent in relative silence, with both of the boys on their laptops or phones. Midoriya kept in touch with Ida and Uraraka through the chat app, but according to them, Bakugo was in the habit of prowling about the 4th floor. Any attempt to meet up would be met with his loud and vulgar fury. When dinner time with the dorm rolled around, Midoriya would invite Todoroki, as usual, and he would politely decline, as usual. One of these days, Midoriya told himself. One of these days, he would get Todoroki to join the others for a meal. Finally, the first day of classes arrived. As it turned out, with a few exceptions, the entire dorm had a 9:30 class. Most of the engineering majors shared a calculus-based physics class, while there were a few taking the advanced biology course alongside Midoriya and Todoroki. Amongst the morning chaos, Midoriya watched Bakugo's door carefully, but he never emerged. When Kirishima left their room, he could see a lump of blankets on one of the beds. Did he not have a Monday morning class? They all ended up walking together. The biology building was next to the engineering building. Midoriya overheard bits and pieces of Uraraka and Ida's conversation about a recent movie release, and he was dimly aware of them trying to ask if he'd like to join them this weekend to see it, but he was still on edge. Bakugo was asleep, he told himself. He wasn't here. Midoriya could talk to his new friends with no fear of being rudely interrupted, and yet he felt a pair of eyes boring into the back of his head. Uraraka called again, "Hey, Earth to Deku?" He stammered. The presence was coming closer. He could sense it. "Kaken, please, not now." He stopped in his tracks and turned on his heel, whispering a pained, "Kaken, please dash." Blue and gray eyes blinked and studied him curiously. "Midoriya?" He bit his lower lip. His roommate, normally so unreadable and stone-faced, looked so sad, disappointed. "I'm sorry, Todoroki," he blurted out. "It's just... God, I'm sorry, Dash." "It's fine," he replied, face settling back into his usual neutral. "If you're looking for him, he's not here." Midoriya felt two hands on both of his shoulders and glanced around to see Uraraka and Ida next to him, offering small smiles. "You'll be okay, Deku," she said cheerfully. The four continued their walk to class. Todoroki declined a lunch invitation, but said he would consider joining them for the movie. Another small victory, Midoriya thought. From what he could overhear in the 5 minutes before class, the kids from Aramis Hall were the only freshmen in the class. The four of them, Midoriya, Todoroki, Azui, and Kuda, grouped together in the front of the lecture hall, which didn't help the overeager freshman stereotype. Then again, many people were gravitating towards the front rows for one particular reason. That reason had just walked into the room, wearing a mustard yellow pinstripe suit that did nothing to hide his muscular body. "Hello, young ones," Dr. Yagi greeted. The entire room fell silent, turning their attention towards their professor. "As some of you may know, I am Dr. Toshinori Yagi. Some of you know me from my research on human augmentation, others I may have treated during my tenure as a medical professional. I am new to this whole teaching business, so please forgive me. We'll be learning the ropes together, I suppose. He fiddled with the computer and pulled up a slideshow. Shall we begin? As the students filed out of the lecture hall, Dr. Yagi approached Midoriya. Gently ruffling his green hair, he greeted, "How was your first few days, young Midoriya?" Midoriya smiled, replying, "They've been great. I've met so many new people, and new people." He glanced towards his neighbors, who were grouped together and waiting for him. He expected Azui to be the one to speak up, but instead, Todoroki stepped forward. Slowly, as if carefully selecting his words, he said, Do you need to talk? We can go, if you need to." Midoriya scratched his head. "Well, we're not going to the lab today. I'll probably be able to still join you guys for lunch. Well, if you go, that is." He faced Azui and Kuda and motioned for them to go ahead. As Todoroki turned to walk away, he called, "I'll see you in chemistry later?" The other boy simply nodded. Midoriya faced Dr. Yagi once more and was surprised to see several books in his arms. "If you don't mind, can you help me carry these back to my office?" Happily, Midoriya took the books into his arms and the two began walking through the hallways. "What are these books?" "Oh, this is the class textbook," muttered Midoriya. "And another intro to bio book?" Dr. Yagi chuckled sheepishly. "I am still new to teaching, like I said. And I'm a little rusty on all this beginner stuff. That was in case I was asked some obscure question. I dunno, considering who you are, I was expecting more questions about your background. And about the augmentation procedures." He trailed off, taking a sudden interest in the cover of one of the textbooks. Dr. Yagi placed a comforting hand on Midoriya's back. "No need to worry about that, my boy. I've ensured that no one knows the truth about you. As far as the school board and everyone else is concerned, you're an exceptional high schooler whose preliminary research lines up with mine. I've asked that any money that would have gone to paying your wages as a research assistant be used for your tuition, as you requested." As they entered his office, Midoriya placed the books down on his desk and sighed in relief. "Thank you." Dr. Yagi hugged him with his free arm as he put down his lecture tools. "Not a problem, my boy. Now, how does next week sound?" Midoriya nodded. "Sounds good. I don't have many side effects that need to be taken care of. How about you?" "Well," the professor took out a handkerchief stained with blood from his BRC pocket. At Midoriya's confused and horrified reaction, he explained, "I'm sure something's going on in my lungs, but I haven't been able to get to the lab to test anything yet. I'm sure you wouldn't like to be hacking up blood anytime soon." Midoriya nodded and smiled weakly, trying to mask his concern. The wheels in his head were already turning, reviewing the causes of coughing up blood, known cures and solutions, possible adjustments he could make to the serums and procedures. "So how have you been?" "Not medically, but," his voice brought Midoriya out of his muttering episode. Dr. Yagi seemed to be struggling picking the right words. "You know, school? Life? I see you're making friends?" "Oh, yeah, I've been making a few friends. But, Midoriya started twiddling his thumbs. "It's just, you know how Kaken is? Young Bakugo." Dr. Yagi took a seat in one of the spare armchairs and he motioned for him to do the same. "He hasn't changed, has he?" Solemnly, Midoriya shook his head. Warily, he asked, "He hasn't been injuring you again?" Midoriya straightened his spine and blurted, "No." "Well, he keeps trying?" At Dr. Yagi's exasperated expression, he desperately added, "He hasn't hit me yet. The other guys on the floor, they hold him back and separate us. This isn't helping, is it?" Grimly, Dr. Yagi said, sighing, he began rubbing his temples. "You know how I feel about young Bakugo, the way he treated you after he was the one who injured you so badly. Almost immediately, Midoriya interrupted, "That wasn't Kaken's fault. It was mine. It was always mine." Upon realizing where the conversation was going, Dr. Yagi tried to change the subject. "You said you were making friends? Those two boys and the girl?" Midoriya perked up, sporting his usual smile. "Oh, them? Well, I don't know Kuda or Azui too well, but Todoroki's my roommate." Some unknown emotion glimmered across Dr. Yagi's face. "Todoroki?" he repeated. Midoriya nodded, making gestures at his hair. Yeah, the one with the red and white. Hey, do you think he's an actual natural-born bilateral chimera? I can't come up with any other explanation, and I think it'd be rude to ask, but I know he doesn't diet or anything dash. Chuckling, Dr. Yagi waved his hands. Whoa, slow down, my boy. Whatever young Todoroki's genetics may be, you should befriend him. He seems the nice type, and it's always good to be friends with your roommate. He glanced around as if making sure there were no hidden cameras or microphones, and then leaned forward and whispered, as rare as it is, I do believe that he has bilateral chimerism, but you should hold off on asking him about it. Midoriya nodded enthusiastically. Oh, and my other friends, Midoriya exclaimed. You'll probably never get to meet them since they're both engineering majors, but there's Tenya Ida, he's kind of intense, but he's a good person, his entire family works for Kobayashi Dash. The car company? Yeah, and they all work R&D too, so that's what he wants to do. And then Ochako Uraraka Dash. Dr. Yagi grinned. A girl? He teased. Midoriya's cheeks flushed. And no, it's not like that. Dr. Yagi folded his arms and said, you know, if you need dating advice, I think I can take a crack at it. Midoriya was laughing now. Aren't you still single though? In a mocking tone reminiscent of a parent, Dr. Yagi retorted, young Midoriya, what did I say about sassing me? He never got his answer. Midoriya was laughing too hard. He tried to keep a straight face, but the young boy's joy was too contagious. Soon, the office was filled with laughter. Todoroki was not present at the dorm's lunch gathering, which, Midoriya admitted, wasn't all that surprising. What was surprising was Todoroki not attending their chemistry class later that afternoon. Most of the engineering majors shared this class as well, so Midoriya didn't feel too lonely with Ida and Uraraka on either side of him. Even so, as he jotted down notes from the syllabus and copied down crude diagrams of molecular structures, he kept expecting to hear the door creak open and to turn around and see his multicolored hair. The professor dismissed the class and there was still no sign of his roommate. He glanced down at his notes. His messy scrawl interspersed with shorthand seemed interchangeable with Egyptian hieroglyphics, and the molecular structures looked more like dying stick figures. Grimacing, he closed his notebook. There was no way he could lend these to Todoroki. Maybe he could ask Uraraka or Ida if he could photocopy their notes. Hey Deku, you want to come to the quad with us? Apparently, all the clubs have set up booths and are giving away free stuff, called Uraraka. Free things? Ida repeated. Well, regardless, I think we should scope out all of the extracurriculars they have on this campus. Perhaps we could all join a club together. Offering an apologetic smile, Midoriya answered, you guys go without me. Todoroki didn't show up, and he probably needs a copy of the notes. If you find anything interesting, text me. As Uraraka gave him a thumbs up, Ida said, will do. And let Todoroki know I will be lecturing him on skipping class. Uraraka snorted. Wow, you really are the fourth floor's mom. While Uraraka teased Ida about being a mother hen, Midoriya started making his way back to the dorm. He hoped his roommate wasn't just being a delinquent and skipping, but he also hoped he hadn't gotten injured or anything serious. Aramis Hall was filled with an eerie silence. Normally, at 4 in the afternoon, there was a group or two in the first floor lounge, watching television and waiting for the rest of the dorm to get hungry. The only sounds were the scratching of pen on paper from the front desk worker and Midoriya's own footsteps. The quiet was almost suffocating. He breathed a sigh of relief when he heard muffled voices from above him in the stairwell. His relief turned into trepidation as he climbed higher and higher. The voice sounded rather angry. He still couldn't make out words, but he knew an angry tone when he heard it. As he set foot on the 4th floor, he realized with dismay that the ferocious voice was coming from his room. But it didn't sound like Todoroki at all. Against his better judgment, he padded closer and pressed his ear against the door. You've been here a week and you haven't found the other whelp? The strange voice growled. Midoriya thought Todoroki was speaking and strained to try to hear him. Whatever his answer was, the other voice didn't like it. Find the child, it roared. I'd like to know exactly what Yagi did to his guinea pig. A chill ran down Midoriya's spine. He clamped his hand over his mouth as a million questions threatened to spill out. Who was this person trying to find him? Why were they trying to find him? How did they know that Dr. Yagi's initial test subject was still alive and attending this university? Extremely muted words indicated that Todoroki was speaking once more, but then he yelped mid-sentence. Midoriya's heart twisted. It almost sounded like the other person had closed their hands around his roommate's throat. In a low snarl, the other voice declared, "I hope you were worth me pulling all those strings to get you into this med university." Midoriya bit his lip as he heard Todoroki gasping for breath. And then heavy footsteps. Sheet, he needed to get away from the door. Stumbling over himself, he scrambled down the hallway and hoped he looked like a normal kid, just walking to his room. The door swung open and a behemoth of a man stepped through, with scarlet hair that almost looked like flames and cold blue eyes. His aura of intimidation was similar to Bakugo's but far, far worse, and Midoriya still hoped against all hope that he was still looking casual. And why was he looking at him? In an amiable, but somehow still threatening voice, he asked, "Excuse me, young man. Is this your room?" When he nodded, the man glanced at the plaque on the door and continued, "Well, Izuku Midoriya, it was nice to meet you. I apologize for startling you, but I needed to speak with your roommate. Have a nice day." With that surprisingly cordial farewell, he walked down the hallway and entered the stairwell. Still stunned and a little bit terrified, Midoriya entered the room and closed the door behind him. The room looked as it usually did, no signs of a scuffle. Just Todoroki, sitting cross-legged on his bed, eyes shut tight, trying to maintain his emotionless face despite his erratic breathing and trembling hands. "Hey," Midoriya called softly. "Softer than usual," Todoroki answered. "Hey." If lowering his volume was supposed to hide his now raspy voice, it didn't work. Taking off his backpack and sitting down on the edge of his bed, Midoriya continued, "I was wondering why you didn't show up to chem, but I guess that guy was why." He lifted his notebook out of his backpack. "I have the notes from class. You can copy them down, if you can read them." He chuckled nervously. Todoroki opened his eyes and started to reach out for the notebook. Midoriya glanced at his left side, the side with strangely familiar red hair and a blue eye, and several miscellaneous facts and observations suddenly coalesced into a sudden, striking revelation. Any control he had over his muttering was gone. "Oh my god, your left side, oh my god, that was your dad. Wait, Todoroki, as in Enji Todoroki, the mad scientist geneticist, you have a mad scientist for a father. Sheet, that must be how you're a chimera. But wait, bilateral is next to impossible in humans, unless, oh my god, he experimented on his own son, and he's looking for me. Oh god, why is he looking for me?" Midoriya dropped the notebook and bit his fist, trying not to whimper or cry. Todoroki didn't look much better. He had withdrawn to the corner between his bed's headboard and the wall, knees drawn up to his chest and burying his face in the crook of his right arm. Once his breathing returned to normal, Midoriya finally noticed how upset Todoroki appeared and cautiously padded across the room. Gently he said, Hey, Todoroki? I'm sorry for all of that, half of that probably isn't true. Just me being a weirdo." His roommate didn't move except for the occasional tremor, and he hovered nervously at the edge of his bed. Should he go and take a seat? Try to get closer? Midoriya reached out his hand to try to give him some reassuring pats. Pats are nice and calming, right? But as soon as their skin made contact, he drew back with a high-pitched squeak. "Holy shit, you're freezing," he cried. Swiftly, he grabbed the throw blanket and leapt onto his roommate's bed. He draped the blanket around Todoroki's shoulders, or at least he tried. His body was flush against the wall and headboard, but as soon as Todoroki felt the blanket, he raised his head and moved forward, taking the blanket in his hands and wrapping it around himself. The two boys sat in silence for what felt like several hours. Midoriya watched him with concerned eyes while Todoroki turned his head to face away from him. Finally, Todoroki spoke. "It's true. All of what you said. It's true." "Sheet," Midoriya cursed. Shifting, he leaned forward and said, "Todoroki, I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do to make it up to you I said it was all true, didn't I?" Todoroki interjected aggressively. "My father's a madman. He made me in a test tube. I'm a Frankenstein's monster." "Why?" He made eye contact with Midoriya, looking like an injured puppy. "Why are you so kind to me?" he asked, his voice breaking. With a small smile, Midoriya responded, "Why didn't you tell him it was me he was looking for?" It took a few moments for Todoroki to process his response, but when he did, he smiled at him, not his usual subtle one, but a real, honest-to-goodness pure smile. Despite the fact that he looked like he was about to cry, Midoriya thought this was the happiest he'd ever seen his roommate. "The dorm usually gets dinner around this time, right?" Todoroki queried. "Yeah. You want to go tonight?" Todoroki shrugged off the blanket and slipped into the green sweater. "I'd like that. I'll be there for you. When the rain starts to pour. I'll be there for you. Like I've been there before. I'll be there for you. 'Cause you're there for me. Too. I'll be there for you, the Rembrandts. 6 friends. Aramis Hall. Ampere, Guayais, I'm hungry, where are we getting dinner? Troublemaker, Beach, I just saw you eat like 5 cookies from that one club booth. Peachy Keen, don't we usually eat at the buffet right next to us? Alien Queen, they banned the bro trio for a week. Troublemaker, what the F, what did you guys do? Spider Bro, pizza eating contest Ampere, I want footed. Alien Queen, Rockefort isn't too far from here. Alien Queen, it's not a buffet, but it's food. Ampere, food. Troublemaker, the idiot has spoken. Upon entering Rockefort Dining Hall, Midoriya's first thought was that this place was much livelier and much louder than their usual dinner hangout. It seemed like Rockefort was modeled after a mall food court, offering a variety of fast food chains. Since a meal plan wasn't required to enter the building, he supposed that this was where most commuter students got their meals. He glanced back to see that, yes, Todoroki was still trailing behind him. His eyes bounced around from display to display, as if he'd never seen so many neon signs before. Deku! Midoriya was greeted by a very bouncy Uraraka hugging him. He froze, not quite sure what to do with his hands. Luckily, she broke the hug before he could do something embarrassing. "And Todoroki too," she exclaimed. "Nice to have you finally join us. You have been eating, right?" Todoroki tilted his head. "Yes," he answered timidly. "I normally cook in the dorm kitchen." Midoriya gasped. "Wow, you can actually cook? Like, cook things that aren't cup noodles?" A very confused Todoroki nodded his head. Meanwhile, Uraraka sighed. "Thank goodness. You know, Ida was convinced that since you didn't show up to any of our food gatherings, you weren't eating at all." Dryly, Todoroki said, "What a mother hen." To Todoroki's confusion, Midoriya and Uraraka started giggling. Between snorts, she managed to say, "Deku, you didn't tell me he had a sense of humor." Furrowing his brow, Todoroki interjected, You talk about me?" Midoriya's face flushed and he suddenly seemed very interested in his shoelaces. Uraraka stepped forward and said, "Nothing bad, we promise. He just gets sad that you never hang out with the rest of us, but now you're finally here. Yay." She bounced in place and clapped. A familiar voice boomed, "Good evening, my friends." As the other two greeted Ida, he clapped Todoroki's back. "It's wonderful to see you finally join us for a meal." He glanced around in a shifty manner before leaning to whisper in his ear, "You have been eating meals, right?" Todoroki couldn't help but smile as he rolled his eyes. Midoriya and Uraraka laughed and reassured Ida that yes, Todoroki was feeding himself. As the four of them started heading towards the burger line, Uraraka and Ida began talking about all of the clubs they visited in the quad earlier. "I'm just saying, there's a jogging club we could all join. It would promote a healthy lifestyle," pleaded Ida. Uraraka groaned. "Ida, please. I don't think any of us like running except for you." "Jogging," he corrected. "Not as intense as running." Midoriya scratched the back of his head. "It sounds fun, but like I told you, my body's not in the best condition." "Well then, we can get it into better condition through jogging." The other two rolled their eyes. "Or maybe perhaps the biking club dash." "Ida," Uraraka interrupted. "Maybe chill on the athletic-based clubs?" He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "The chess club then?" Uraraka and Midoriya howled with laughter. As she elbowed him softly, she exclaimed, "Ida, you absolute nerd." Sputtering inelegantly, he placed his hands on his hips. "Well, did you see anything interesting?" Uraraka placed her pointer finger on her chin. You know, I think the hide-and-seek club would be fun, actually. Simultaneously, Midoriya and Todoroki repeated, hide-and-seek club? She grinned. Yeah, they play hide-and-seek in the quad, but they also play capture the flag, freeze tag, sardines, red light green light, red rover dash. As Midoriya squealed in childish delight, Todoroki asked, are you making some of those up? The other three fell silent and Uraraka studied him curiously. Have you never played any of those? Todoroki broke eye contact and said, I know hide and seek in tag, but I don't know how freezing would work in tag. Uraraka sighed and placed her hands on Todoroki's shoulders. That settles it. We're joining the hide and seek club so you can play all of these wonderful childhood games, she declared with a smile. Midoriya hooped in agreement, but Ida stamped his foot. Isn't that club running based as well? Giggling, Uraraka said, but this is fun running. As Ida and Uraraka started arguing about which running-based clubs were more fun, Midoriya sidled up to Todoroki. Are you doing okay? He whispered. You haven't been saying much, so I got kinda worried. Todoroki shrugged. Midoriya, I don't say much anyway. In response to his pleading green eyes, he continued, I'm perfectly fine. I like listening to them talk. The two amused boys watched their friends argue until their order was called. After swiping their meal plan cards, they headed towards the large group of people trying to arrange the tables and chairs so that all 20 or so people could sit down together. The four sat down at one end of the long makeshift table. Across from them were two girls, one with long black hair pulled back in a ponytail and another with short hair and a pair of expensive-looking headphones around her neck. They seemed to be having a heated debate over, hang on, did Todoroki hear that right? Were those two arguing about the best way to make a cinnamon mocha? Yaoyorozu. Jairu. Ida greeted. We missed you yesterday. Jairu shrugged her shoulders. Well, you know. She pointed her thumb accusingly at the other girl. I had to teach this one how to make all the drinks at the cafe. Yaoyorozu folded her arms and huffed. I'm just saying you should add in the cinnamon before you pour in the steamed milk. That way, there's less powder residue in the finished drink. Well then, maybe you're mixing it wrong? How do you mix a drink wrong? Smirking, Jairu waved her hand dismissively. We can talk about this later. What's more important is dash. She slammed the table with her palm and pointed accusingly at Ida. Why the goddamn hell did you allow them to have a food-eating contest? Taken aback, Ida defended, well, it's a buffet. All you can eat. I saw no problem with it. Jairu groaned loudly. You didn't think that those three bro idiots would eat all the pizza they had? I didn't know they had bottomless stomachs, okay? Todoroki couldn't help but chuckle. His eyes wandered and locked with Yaoyorozu's. She gasped and started tapping on Jairu's shoulder. He shifted in his seat while self-consciously patting down his hair. The way her eyes widened, it had to be his half-and-half appearance. Jairu, she hissed. Where are your manners? We have someone new. Wah. Her eyes wandered and found him. Oh shit, sorry. How'd I not notice you? Anywho, she extended her arm. Kyuko Jairu. Hesitantly, he shook her hand. Shuto Todoroki. Jairu grinned and faced her friend. See, I'm not a complete heathen. She rolled her eyes and chuckled. Turning to Todoroki, she said, and I'm Momo Yaoyorozu. Are you on the second or fourth floor? I've never actually seen you before. Midoriya cheerfully interjected, oh yeah. He's my roommate. He turned to Todoroki and said, sorry for not introducing you right away. Jairu nodded in recognition. Right, the one who's always cold, yeah. Pointing to him, she said, you know, that sweater goes surprisingly good with your hair. Surprisingly well, Yaoyorozu corrected. But yes, green is a good color on you. Blushing, Todoroki nearly buried his face in his food. It was the first time anyone had ever complimented his appearance. He glanced over at Midoriya, who was busy chatting with Ida and Uraraka. Did he know that this emerald sweater would look good on him? He was caught off guard when Midoriya turned and made eye contact with him. You're still good, right? He asked gently. When he nodded, Midoriya smiled. Great. Let me know if you get uncomfortable at all. I can walk you back to the dorm. Todoroki shifted in his seat. You don't need to, I can your dash. As he struggled to string together a coherent sentence, he wondered if his social skills were really this rusty. Talking more to his burger than his roommate, he managed to say, "You're far too kind, Midoriya." Over the course of the next few minutes, the rest of the group had trickled in. Todoroki recognized most of the boys from the fourth floor. Thankfully, Bakugo was absent. Mina Ashido enthusiastically introduced herself and immediately started asking invasive, personal questions. It took the combined efforts of Midoriya and Uraraka to shoo her away. If Midoriya hadn't pointed out Hagakure, sitting between Ashido and Ojiro, he probably would have never noticed her. Azui, please call me Tsu, she had said, was in their biology class and, as it turned out, also shared his class schedule. They were in the middle of small talk about the biology topics when an unsettlingly familiar voice boomed through the room. "Yo, pink cheeks, you're in my spot." Their half of the table fell silent as they turned towards Bakugo, who was fixing Uraraka with a threatening glare. Todoroki could see that she was trembling, but even so, she said, "I was here first, Baku. Besides, you can't own a spot dash." Yeah, I can," he growled, stepping forward and sitting down, half on Uraraka's chair and half on Midoriya's. Ignoring Ida's furious reprimands, Bakugo turned to Midoriya and hissed, "Scoot over, fattest Deku." Visibly shaking, he did as he was ordered, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Bakugo moved so that he was no longer on Uraraka's chair, but Midoriya was nearly falling off of his trying to accommodate him. Todoroki shifted his chair so that his roommate was in no danger of falling, but Midoriya was now leaning into his chest. Was his heart beating faster? He didn't recall having any heart problems. The conversations around them died, replaced by apprehensive whispers and furtive glances at Bakugo, who was tearing into his slice of pizza like a barbarian. Todoroki felt Midoriya trembling against his chest, pressing into him in an attempt to get away from Bakugo. Looking around, he saw Uraraka shaking similarly, with Ida placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Is that a friend thing to do? Hearing a soft whimper, he glanced down. Midoriya was frozen in fear, ignoring his food, watching Bakugo with the unease of a cornered animal. "Kaken?" he called. How was your day?" With his mouth full, Bakugo answered, "Why do you want to know?" "Oh, I thought I'd ask." Midoriya withdrew, studying his shaking, clasped hands. Todoroki glanced one more time at Uraraka and Ida. If that was a thing that friends did to comfort each other. Carefully, he lifted his hand and moved to place it on his shoulder. With inhuman speed, Bakugo's hand reached out and grasped his wrist. Sardonically, he said, "Better be careful, half and half. Useless Deku here has glass bones and paper skin. Wouldn't want to break him, right? Kaken, let him go." There was a boldness in Midoriya's voice that wasn't there before, taking Todoroki by surprise. Bakugo smirked, tightening his grip on Todoroki's wrist. "Or what, you'll break your hand trying to punch me?" Despite Todoroki's increased pain tolerance, a small distressed noise escaped his lips. Apparently, this was the last straw for Midoriya. Louder, he repeated, "Kaken, let him go." The other half of the table finally seemed to realize what was going on, and some of them were already preparing to intervene if Bakugo decided to escalate the situation. Luckily, Bakugo seemed to notice. Loosening his grip, he conceded, "Crybaby. You're lucky I like you." Just when Todoroki thought they were out of the woods, Bakugo's eyes snapped back up and glared at him, as if noticing something that he'd been oblivious to earlier. Tightening his grip, he got to his feet and yanked hard, sending Midoriya off balance and nearly dislocating Todoroki's arm. Dragging Todoroki closer, he hissed, "You and half freak." Katsuki Bakugo. With one hand, Ida grabbed Bakugo's thumb, forcing him to break his grip. With the other, he grabbed his shirt and dragged him backwards. Midoriya regained his footing and stood between Todoroki and Bakugo. Uraraka did the same. Bakugo made no move to escape, instead fixing them with a malicious grin and saying, "Wow, Deku. The loser girlfriend wasn't enough? You have to get some D on the side? What a FING slot." Ida tugged back on his shirt and yelled, "You take that back, you heathen." Swiftly, Bakugo elbowed him in the gut, freeing himself. As Ida keeled over, he shoved his hands into his pockets and stomped off, mumbling something about losing his appetite. Most of the group rushed over to Todoroki and Ida, while a lone Kirishima ran after his roommate. Midoriya kneeled next to Ida, offering a hand. "You okay? Did he injure you?" Shaking his head, Ida took Midoriya's hand and they both stood up. "I'm just winded. My guard was down." Satisfied, he turned to Todoroki. "Are you okay? Can I see your wrist?" Todoroki cast his eyes down and hid his wrist behind his back, muttering, "I'm okay, Midoriya, don't worry." "Let me see," he repeated firmly as he ran a gentle hand down his arm, bringing his wrist forward. His fingers brushed against his skin as he pulled the sweater sleeve down. Todoroki's heart began beating erratically again. He made a mental note to have himself checked. Midoriya sighed in relief, saying, "Good, he didn't leave a bruise." Todoroki couldn't help but wonder how many bruises Bakugo had inflicted on other people, or on Midoriya. Uraraka sighed. "Looks like we're on his sheet list." "I'm pretty sure everyone's on his sheet list," Azui corrected, glaring after Bakugo. "It's just that you guys are at the top." Sarcastically, Todoroki commented, "Well, this should be a great year." "It will be." Yaoyorozu stepped forward, her arms folded. "I, for one, won't let him run around bullying people as he pleases." The rest of them murmured in agreement. Jairu lightly ruffled Midoriya's hair. "We got your back. If that a-hole gives you sheet, or any one of you dash," she motioned to the other three. "He gives any of you sheet, text us. We'll come running." Todoroki glanced around at their supportive nods and smiled. Having friends wasn't as bad as he thought. Kirishima cursed. His roommate walked a lot faster than he thought. He was okay with being a punching bag, he was okay with occasionally having to hold him back, but that scene back there? That was way too far. "Bakugo," he called again. Instead of stopping, his roommate walked faster. Muttering a string of curses, he sprinted forward, skidding to a stop in Bakugo's path. He fixed him with angry red eyes. "What?" Kirishima's jaw dropped. "What do you mean, what?" He motioned angrily towards the dining hall. "What the hell was all that?" "None of your business." He shouldered past him, pace unchanging. Kirishima cut him off again. "Seriously? That was way too far, man. What's up with you and Midoriya?" Growling, Bakugo hit his chest with the palm of his hand. Any other person would have been knocked flat on the ground, but Kirishima had learned to brace himself every time his roommate raised his hands. Bakugo gritted his teeth. "Get out of the way, hedgehog hair." "Hedgehog hair?" Kirishima repeated, self-consciously reaching up to prod at his painstakingly spiked hairstyle. "Wait, this wasn't the time for that." Stepping forward, he asked, "What is he to you?" Curling his hand into a fist, he screamed, "He's nothing. He's just useless Deku." Kirishima studied his roommate. His bullshit alarm was going haywire, but he had to put his suspicions into words first. Taking his silence as a victory for himself, Bakugo walked past him. Katsuki Bakugo. He had been an angry person from day one. He had been a lone wolf from day one. Every time Kirishima entered their room, he would make up some excuse to leave or just ignore him entirely. He would go to the gym on his own, and every time he was spotted in the dorm, he was skulking by himself. Besides Kirishima himself, there was only one other person in the entire dorm that tried to be kind to Bakugo. In his head, a light bulb flickered to life. Kirishima turned and called, "If he's nothing, why are you always with him?" Bakugo stopped in his tracks. After another uncomfortable silence, he refuted, "I'm not always dash." "Yes you are." Kirishima began walking towards him. "When you're not alone, you're with him. And sometimes, you go out of your way to do it, like tonight." Bakugo said nothing, his hands still clenched in shaking fists. He had to be cautious now. He slowly made his way around so he could face his roommate. But instead of having murder written all over his face, it seemed like Bakugo was contemplative. He still looked really angry, but Kirishima felt like he wouldn't suddenly punch him. In a softer voice, he added, "The one person you actually want to be around is terrified of you, and you being a sheet to him doesn't help anything. But somehow, to Midoriya, you're still kakin. What the hell is up with you two?" Quietly, Bakugo said, "None of your business." "I know it's not my business," he reaffirmed, folding his arms. If he really is nothing to you, then by all means keep running away. But if you care about him at all, you should man up and apologize for how shitty you were tonight. Bakugo snorted. You gonna make me say sorry to that useless F-dash? Kirishima's lips thinned. Oh. This is your decision to make. With those parting words, he headed back to the dining hall. To Kirishima's disappointment, Bakugo never returned to the dining hall. The evening continued on as usual, as if the scene from a soap opera had never occurred. Occasionally, he would glance over to the other side of the table to check on Midoriya and his friends. They seemed to be doing fairly well. The fake RA and the cute girl did most of the talking, with Midoriya and his roommate nodding along and laughing. A strange thought occurred to him. Was there ever a time when Midoriya was that happy and comfortable around Bakugo? Something in Kirishima's gut told him to stick close to Midoriya's group as they all walked back to the dorm. Upon entering the building, he saw why. Sitting on one of the couches was Bakugo. As he stood up, the rest of the group fell silent and froze. An uneasy tension filled the lounge as Bakugo walked towards Midoriya's group. Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki stepped forward to shield him while Kirishima stood to the side. This was the moment of truth, Kirishima thought. Was his roommate as much of a man as he thought he was? Grimacing as if just saying the words pained him, Bakugo mumbled. Sorry, Death. What? Midoriya squeaked. He weaved in between his friends and approached Bakugo, gazing at him with hopeful adoration. Dash. Snarling, Bakugo interrupted. Don't get me wrong, idiot. You're still useless. He glared at the other three. And I still hate their faces, but... He gritted his teeth and kicked at the floor. What I did earlier. It was shitty. Sorry. Not waiting for a response, Bakugo stomped off. Kirishima sighed in relief. His roommate wasn't heartless after all. This is the story of a girl who cried a river and drowned the whole world. And while she looked so sad in photographs, I absolutely love her when she smiles. Absolutely. Story of a girl, 9 days. 7. Blankets and movies. Bakugo had not yelled at Midoriya in several days, which was comforting and terrifying at the same time. He could still feel his signature glares from across the room, but he supposed asking Bakugo to change overnight was too tall of an order. At least he could enjoy time with his new friends in peace. Cheerful and bubbly Uraraka, stern but kind Ida, and surprisingly enough, Todoroki. His roommate had become his shadow, but unlike Bakugo's foreboding and menacing aura, Todoroki's presence was calming and reassuring. If he started muttering, Todoroki would call him back with a soft Midoriya, compared to Uraraka, who would let him continue, or Ida, who would karate chop the air to grab his attention. Midoriya also supposed he unconsciously chewed his pens a lot, because at some point, Todoroki started gently taking them from his hands and putting them back in his backpack, saying that he should probably stop chewing pens before he ruined them all. Later that day, he inspected them all and realized, to his chagrin, that they resembled dog chew toys. He may not say much and he may not know much about him, but Midoriya felt that Todoroki was just as important to him as Uraraka and Ida. Still yawning, Midoriya sat up in his bed and stretched. He reached over to his phone and turned off his alarm 5 minutes before it was set to chime. Studying his sleepy reflection in the dark screen, he wondered if he even needed to set an alarm anymore. The rising sun illuminated their room at just about the right time, forcing him awake every morning without fail. Rubbing his eyes, he shuffled around and got ready to shower and brush his teeth. Todoroki was still sleeping soundly. When he got back, he was surprised to see his roommate still under the covers. Walking over, he prodded his sleeping form, calling, "Hey, you're gonna be late if you don't wake up." A small, disgruntled noise came from the covers as they twisted. Did he just try to roll away from him? Midoriya grasped what he thought was his shoulder and shook it, saying, "Todoroki, seriously. You need to wake up. We have a biology lab at 10. A pair of hands tugged the covers down, revealing an unamused Todoroki with bed head so terrible, the majority of his dual-toned hair was now pink. "Midoriya, are you talking about the biology lab that Dr. Yagi canceled because it's LBR Day weekend? Did he really wake up and get ready for nothing?" Todoroki grinned as he sat up. If Ida were here. Chuckling, Midoriya started chopping the air in a crude imitation of his friend. Izuku Midoriya, watch your language. The two boys laughed. Midoriya couldn't help but stare at his roommate. His smiles, once so rare, were so appealing and paired with his ridiculous pink bed head. Midoriya, he called, making eye contact. What are you looking at? He mumbled inelegantly. Midoriya prayed to every god he knew that he wasn't blushing too much. Pointing at his own fluffy curls, he said, Your hair. Todoroki hopped out of bed and inspected himself in the mirror hanging on Midoriya's wardrobe. Frowning slightly, he ran his hand through his hair a few times. As if by magic, the two sides separated themselves perfectly, as if it wasn't a total mess a few seconds ago. Turning to him, he asked, Better? Midoriya's jaw dropped. How do you do that? Todoroki started rubbing his cheek nervously. Do what? Fix your hair in 5 seconds. Looking almost relieved, he shrugged his shoulders. Here, let me try. Suddenly he stepped forward and, what on earth, he was trying to do the same thing with Midoriya's hair, but no matter how hard he tried, his diamond curls just wouldn't lay flat. Cheeks turning a vibrant shade of red, Midoriya pleaded, Todoroki, it's okay, I know my hair just doesn't behave. Todoroki's brow furrowed and his mouth curled into a small pout as he tried fruitlessly to tame his hair. He grumbled, Midoriya, your hair is too fluffy. Laughing, Midoriya took his hands and pulled them away. Todoroki, it's fine, I promise. After a short pause, his roommate seemed to realize that their hands were grasped together and he abruptly pulled his away, as if touching a hot stove. The friendly mirth was replaced by an awkward silence. Scratching the back of his head, Midoriya asked, So, wanna get breakfast? On Jairu's adamant insistence, Midoriya and Todoroki decided to stop by Café de Winter. The weather was warm enough that Todoroki didn't require any extra layers, and the light breeze gently shook the treetops. Midoriya could definitely get used to this mild weather. As they walked, they chatted lightly, discussing biology and the short papers they had to write for English over the weekend. The Dumas town square was just a short walk downhill from Aramis Hall. Café de Winter was situated on the side closest to the campus, so there was no need to wait at crosswalks. From what Jairu had told them, many of the residential college students ended up working there since it was so close to their dorms. Through the window, Midoriya could already see Yaoyorozu, Jairu, and another girl with red hair tied back in a ponytail behind the counter. A small bell jingled as they opened the front door, prompting the other girl to say, Welcome to Café de Winter. Tilting her head, she studied them closely and continued, Hey, you two are from the dorm, right? Wait, who's here? Jairu called from over her shoulder. She topped off a drink with some whipped cream and passed it to Yaoyorozu. Turning around, she grinned and said, Midoriya, Todoroki, glad you could finally make it. With a chuckle, Midoriya replied, Well, you've only been bugging us to come by for the last week. 2 weeks, actually, corrected Todoroki. After some fits of laughter, Midoriya ordered a donut and a cinnamon mocha while Todoroki had a bagel and a cinnamon latte. Midoriya excitedly noted that they both liked cinnamon in their drinks. The cafe was still pretty empty, so they had their pick of the tables. Todoroki picked a small one by the window. So, you haven't said anything about it, and I didn't want to assume, but are you going home this weekend? Asked Midoriya. Todoroki shook his head. Are you? Midoriya snorted. Like I'd make the 8-hour drive back to a town where no one except Kaken likes me? At his roommate's concerned look, he mumbled, Did I overshare again? Nodding, Todoroki said, If Bakugo's the only one that likes you, I'd hate to see how the rest of your town treats you. Midoriya brought his elbows up onto the table and sighed. They pretend I don't exist, mostly. I think they're all too afraid of Kaken to try to talk to me. Todoroki's lips thinned. Bakugo bullied an entire town into not talking to you? Scratching his head nervously, Midoriya explained, Well, I was exaggerating when I said, whole town. I mean, Monte Cristo is a pretty big city. It was just all the people that went to our school. He bullied an entire school. Todoroki buried his face in one of his hands. Why is he so? Bakugo? Midoriya opened his mouth to respond, but Jairu had chosen that exact moment to approach them with their food. Sheepishly, she guessed, "Did I interrupt something?" The two boys shared a quick glance before answering simultaneously. "No," said Midoriya. "Yes," said Todoroki. An awkward silence settled over the table. The boys shared a longer, more frustrated look before again replying simultaneously. "Yes," said Midoriya. "No," said Todoroki. After another silence, more awkward than the first, Jiraiya said, "You guys want to make up your mind or what?" Admitting defeat, Midoriya sighed. He asked why Kaken is so angry all the time. Transferring their food to the table from her serving tray, she pulled up a chair. "I'd like to hear this if you don't mind." The brothers have been asking Kirishima, but he knows just as much as they do. With the two of them looking at him expectantly, Midoriya started twiddling his thumbs. "We lived in a small suburb of Monte Cristo. All the people in the neighborhood knew each other, and they all knew that Kaken was amazing. Perfect grades, charismatic, leader of the neighborhood kids, and the only one who would consider being friends with me. The charity case. I was not the healthiest kid. I was in the hospital every other week because I was sick or someone broke my bones." Jiraiya interrupted, "That someone being Bakugo?" "No," Midoriya vehemently objected. It was always one of the other kids. And it was always an accident. I was just that fragile. Kaken, well, he was always trying to keep me safe. But then, he sighed and took a sip of his mocha, as if to steel his nerves. Everyone was always telling him that I wasn't worth the effort, that he couldn't save me from everything, that I would probably catch a cold and it would turn into pneumonia or bronchitis or something, that he was too good for the charity case. I guess it went to his head. He gripped the mug tightly, even though it was still quite hot. He wouldn't get a burn from it anyway, it didn't matter. A gentle hand pried his away from the mug. Midoriya's eyes traveled up the arm to make eye contact with Todoroki. His hand briefly lingered in his before he drew it back. Quietly he said, "That mug is still hot. Don't hurt yourself." Jiraiya drummed her fingers on the table. "So I guess that's why you keep trying to be nice to him, but really, what are the odds that he'll go back to the way he was?" Midoriya shrugged. "I don't know. I hope he does, but..." Todoroki leaned forward. "Midoriya, if I had someone like Bakugo in my life, I would never forgive him. If the rest of your life was anything like our first week here..." Todoroki tried to imagine Bakugo being nice, but all he could see was angry snarling, smug smirks, and a frightened Midoriya. Todoroki's hand curled into a fist. "Him being your childhood friend does not excuse everything else he's done to you." Midoriya could only look at him sadly while prodding his donut. Maybe you're right." Todoroki knew he had done something wrong. Midoriya had barely touched his food, and he was unusually quiet on their walk back to the dorm. He wished that there was some distracting noise they could comment on, but the town was also unusually quiet. The birds chirped and the leaves rustled, but with the exception of car engines in the distance, there were no man-made noises. There seemed to be no human life on campus, either. The quad, usually full of club booths and students, was empty, save for the squirrels. Todoroki strained his ears for any sound of anyone else, but he could only hear the white noise of nature. "Hey, Todoroki? You coming?" He hadn't even realized that he had stopped moving. Midoriya was looking back, his hand outstretched towards him. Jogging to catch up with his roommate, he said, "Sorry? It's just so empty." Midoriya nodded. "Yeah. I guess a lot of people went home for the weekend." The two boys continued their walk in silence. Thankfully, there was someone at the dorm to loudly greet them. To Todoroki's relief, that someone was not named Ida. Uraraka burst through the front doors and clasped Midoriya's hands, bouncing up and down. "Hey Deku, we just had the best idea." Midoriya chuckled nervously. "What idea?" "There's only a few of us left, so we're all going to build a blanket fort and watch movies tonight." Todoroki watched, fascinated, as Midoriya's face lit up, shedding his previous melancholy. He squealed in childish delight as he turned to face him. "Todoroki, you're coming too, right? Blanket forts? Movies?" He wasn't too sure about either of them, but Todoroki didn't want to see that smile fade away again. He nodded and offered a small smile of his own. "Yay!" Uraraka cheered. She turned back around to open the door and yelled, "Hey Ida, they're coming too." Oh dear. In his usual theatrical way, Ida threw open the other door and screamed, "Excellent. You two will be helping me with the blanket fort." Todoroki tried his best to hide his grimace while Midoriya cheered happily. Todoroki followed his happy, bouncing roommate into the lounge, where the couches and armchairs were already arranged in a rough semicircle around the big screen television. A large amount of blankets and pillows were sitting nearby, while Midoriya and Ida seemed engrossed in some sort of discussion. Kaminari announced his presence and handed Todoroki some "wait what?" Staring blankly at the rather large spool of string in his hands, he asked, "Why do we need this?" Midoriya and Ida both looked at him like he was crazy. "It's for structural support," Ida explained while gesturing. "Otherwise, the middle of the fort will sag and none of us will be able to sit up or actually see the TV screen." "Yeah, that's like Blanket Fort 101, added Kaminari as he dragged one of the floor lamps towards the construction site. Ida began directing Kaminari on floor lamp placement while Midoriya started lifting the individual blankets, as if weighing them. Wordlessly, Todoroki handed him the spool. "Hey, thanks," he said with a smile. He kept lifting the blankets, sorting them into two piles. For the life of him, Todoroki couldn't figure out how Midoriya was sorting them. "What are you doing?" "HM? Oh, I'm figuring out which blankets to use for the roof based on the string Kaminari had." Todoroki pointed to the blanket on top of the pile. "Can we use this one?" Midoriya snorted. "No, this is way too heavy. It would break the string and it'd probably be really bad for air circulation. Really big and soft, though, this is more for the floor." He tossed it into one of the piles and picked up the next one, which seemed to be a thin bed sheet. "This one is a good roof sheet. It's light and thin, see?" he explained as he handed it to him. As he idly fingered the sheet in his hands, Todoroki asked, "How do you guys know all this?" His green eyes looked at him with curiosity. Have you ever built a blanket fort, Todoroki?" As he shook his head, Midoriya's jaw dropped. "Midoriya, string." Without looking away from him or closing his mouth, Midoriya handed the spool to Ida. As the other two boys busied themselves with setting up the frame of the fort, Midoriya whispered, "What do you mean, you've never built a blanket fort?" Like, he glanced nervously at the setup, wringing his hands. Like, "Do you think this is stupid and, oh, I'm sorry, all of this must seem childish to you, I dash?" Todoroki bit his lip. His social incompetency must have made Midoriya sad again. He placed his hand on Midoriya's, calming him instantly. "Midoriya, to be perfectly honest, the idea of draping a blanket over some chairs and hiding in it had never occurred to him or any of his three siblings. They'd always been content with board games and story time with Mama. But now that he thought about it, my father would have never allowed something like this, he explained. I think, his eyes wandered over to Ida and Kaminari, who were now draping Midoriya's selected blankets over the X-shaped roof frame. I think this will be fun. As the smile returned to Midoriya's face, he felt a strange fluttering sensation in his chest. He thought perhaps there was some plant in the Dumas region that he was allergic to. All of these odd symptoms started occurring a few days after he'd arrived at college. But he supposed as long as there was nothing immediately threatening his well-being, it was nothing to worry about. A lot more people had gone home than Midoriya had expected. Of the 40 residents, only 8 of them remained: himself, Todoroki, Uraraka, Ida, Azui, Yaoyorozu, Jiraiya, and Kaminari. He guessed it was a good thing. There was no way they could build a fort large enough to accommodate all of them. Yaoyorozu and Jiraiya came back from their shift with several pizzas and a stack of DVDs. As they all stood and ate in the kitchen, Jiraiya and Kaminari had wanted to eat in the fort, but Ida adamantly refused, saying something about the dangers of crumbs and ants. Jiraiya laid out the DVD cases and called for a vote. Upon seeing the lineup, Midoriya knew exactly which movie he was voting for. Something tugged at his shirt sleeve as a soft voice whispered in his ear, "Midoriya, I've never seen any of these movies before." He fought the urge to ask Todoroki if he had an actual childhood and instead pointed at one of the cases and answered, "Vote for that one, I'll explain later." With the top 2 contenders being selected for the night, the group settled into the fort, chatting happily. Jairu, Kaminari, and Uraraka immediately sprawled out on the fort floor, prompting Ida to lecture them on leaving some room for the 5 other people. Todoroki nestled himself in the back corner, grasping a small blanket Midoriya had brought down for him. Midoriya crawled around to sit next to him, but was nearly pushed into his lap by a grumbling Ida. Sorry, Midoriya. If some people would just leave room for the rest of us. Kaminari rolled over and groaned. Geez, sorry mum. Ida started chopping the air. If I were actually your mother. As the fort erupted into laughter, Todoroki asked, So Midoriya, what is that movie you asked me to vote for? Midoriya grinned as he said, Oh, it's a classic. Have you really never seen any of those movies before? Todoroki tilted his head. I have no reason to lie to you. How should he explain this movie? Well, this one is kind of like, it's basically a kiddie version of Hamlet, but with animated lions. And they sing. Midoriya hoped that his description of the movie conveyed its life-changing majesty. The look on Todoroki's face indicated that he had failed miserably. It's a great movie, trust me, he pleaded. After a few moments of contemplation, Todoroki nodded. I trust you. While Yaoyorozu dimmed the lights and took her seat, Jairu announced, It's starting, shut up. As the logo for the animation studio appeared on the screen, Midoriya clenched his teeth. Nope, he would resist the urge this time. For the sake of his friend, who had never seen this movie before, he would not, under any circumstances. The sun rose over the African savanna and half of the group, Midoriya included, started belting out their own terrible renditions of the opening chorus. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Todoroki jump a foot in the air, confused and probably a little terrified. His roommate hissed, Midoriya, what the F? On his other side, Ida gasped. Shuto Todoroki, watch your language. Todoroki continued to stare at him, looking a little betrayed. Sheepishly, Midoriya scratched the back of his head and said, I told you there would be singing. Wait a hot minute. Pausing the movie, Jairu sat up and looked at them. Todoroki, you haven't seen this before? Todoroki blinked. Oh. Why? He started rubbing his cheek, blushing. Is this an important movie? Everyone murmured agreement, but were all silenced by Jairu. She ordered, Okay guys. Don't ruin this for Todoroki. Singing along. Amidst some groans, she unpaused the movie. To be honest, Midoriya watched Todoroki more than the movie. He didn't need to watch the screen, he knew every line of dialogue and every note of the songs and score. He wanted his quiet roommate to enjoy himself, and it appeared as though he was. Todoroki bobbed back and forth during the musical numbers, smiled at the friendships and budding romance, and Midoriya was almost sure he had shed a single tear when the lion cub's father died. After the Coelom, as the protagonist ascended to his rightful throne in the midst of a rainstorm, Todoroki had leaned forward, his jaw dropping. The credits started rolling, and 7 heads turned towards Todoroki. He simply said, I liked it. They all cheered. After Kaminari loudly announced that he couldn't feel his butt, everyone agreed to take a short break before the next movie. Midoriya made a beeline for the kitchen. If Ida wouldn't allow pizza into the fort, there was no way a mug of hot chocolate would be acceptable. He was trying to cool off his freshly made drink when Todoroki stepped into the doorway. Hey Todoroki. Hey. He leaned against the door frame, avoiding eye contact. Midoriya drummed his fingers on the still warm mug. What to say? I'm really glad you liked the movie. It's my favorite childhood movie. Todoroki nodded, saying, I can see why you like it. He still wasn't making eye contact. Of course, his roommate wasn't known for maintaining it, but what on earth could he be looking at? Midoriya realized too late that his roommate was staring at the mug in his hands. Turning scarlet, he blabbered, Oh God, I'm sorry Todoroki, I should have asked if you wanted some, I can make you a cup if you want. Midoriya. He shut his mouth, fidgeting nervously. Instead of scowling, like everyone else after one of his muttering episodes, Todoroki smiled. It's fine. Actually, have you seen Kaminari anywhere? Midoriya tilted his head. Oh. I haven't seen him since the end of the movie. Frowning, Todoroki nodded and left. Midoriya grasped the mug and kept blowing on it. The next movie would be starting any minute. He brought the mug to his lips. A voice echoed down the hallway. Midoriya, that's probably still hot. Don't burn yourself. He lowered the mug enough to call back, I won't, Todoroki. After 2 seconds of contemplation, he took a sip and winced. It was still hot. Thankfully, the break was much longer than Midoriya thought it would be. It turned out that Kaminari had made the well-thought-out decision to run to the grocery store a few blocks away for a pint of ice cream. When he burst through the doors, sweating and holding up his ice cream like it was some sort of trophy, Ida and Jairu started yelling at him. After the lecturing subsided, Yaoyorozu announced that she would be starting the next movie. With Ida forcing Kaminari to eat his ice cream outside the fort, there was more breathing room. Midoriya took his seat next to Todoroki, taking care to leave some space between them. He wasn't quite sure whether or not he was comfortable being so close during the last movie. Better safe than sorry. He was proven wrong when Todoroki closed the gap, curling up next to his left side. Wrapping the blanket around his knees, Todoroki murmured, I'm cold. It's okay, he replied as the movie started. This second movie was done by another branch of the same animation company, and Todoroki had also never seen it. Luckily, it wasn't a musical. Midoriya swore that Todoroki sighed in relief when he explained it to him. Midoriya outlined the plot: a clownfish searching the ocean for his lost son. Todoroki simply nodded, already engrossed in the movie. It was another one of Midoriya's favorites, but for some reason he couldn't keep his eyes open. Was it that late already? Or maybe it was the hot chocolate. The soothing sight of an animated ocean? He watched the light dance in the water. How these animators could accomplish this sense of realism, he would never know. He rested his head on Todoroki's shoulder and closed his eyes. Hopefully he would forgive him for taking a short nap. Midoriya. He shifted, making small disgruntled noises. Whoever was calling his name, they would have to wait. Midoriya. No, 5 more minutes. Midoriya. With great difficulty, he opened his eyes and immediately shut them again. It was too bright to be his room. Where was he again? Midoriya. A firm hand shook his shoulder. Groaning and rubbing his eyes, he forced himself to take a look at his surroundings. A blanket roof blocking part of the sunlight coming in through the windows, sheets and pillows strewn across the floor, several sleeping bodies. Right now he remembered. The blanket fort, the movies, falling asleep on Todoroki's shoulder. Oh God! He snapped his head up, eyes wide and fully awake. And not even 5 inches from his face were a pair of blue and gray eyes. He didn't look angry or embarrassed, but then again he never really showed much of any emotion. Todoroki squeezed his shoulder. Midoriya, I have a very important question. Midoriya gulped. He had no good excuse for being so close to him. He should have asked permission first. He should have. I fell asleep. Did they find the fish, son? Oh, thank God. Midoriya sighed, a stupid nervous grin spreading across his face. Yeah, they found him. Todoroki smiled and nodded. Drawing his knees up to his chest, he said, I liked that movie too. Oh good. That one's my second favorite childhood movie. Surreptitiously, he scooted a few inches to his right. Maybe his roommate didn't care that he'd used him as a pillow last night. But he'd better give him some breathing room and his personal space back. Just in case. Todoroki didn't seem to notice the small movement. Rubbing his chin with his forefinger, he asked, Why do you like that one? Besides the related animation companies, they don't seem to have too much in common. Well, Midoriya took a quick glance around the fort. Both Ida and Kaminari were out cold and snoring like trucks. Uraraka was facing away from them and bundled in several blankets, and the rest of them seemed to have left. If he kept his voice down. He leaned towards Todoroki and whispered, It's the dad. He went through so much to find his son and bring him back safe. I wish my dad was like that. Instead of just being gone. For the past 18 years. Todoroki stared at him blankly, unmoving. Midoriya realized too late that he had personally witnessed Todoroki's father raking him across the coals and possibly crushing his windpipe. In comparison, having an absent father didn't seem so bad after all. Cringing, he frantically whispered, I'm so sorry, I'm in no place to complain. I overheard your dad that one time. It was an accident dash. Midoriya. He clamped his hand over his mouth. Todoroki just smiled sadly. Todoroki rested his chin on the tops of his knees. You should know why he's looking for you. Silently, Midoriya shifted so that he was facing Todoroki. From what I understand, Dr. Yagi and my father worked on similar human augmentation serums. Yagi was content to improve the lives of people like you. But father, he wanted to go one step further. He wanted humans to be born with the augmentations. The population of super soldiers. My oldest brother, he was the only one of us to be conceived normally. He would splice together zygotes in test tubes and implant them in my mother. He idly fingered his red and white strands of hair. I was his crowning achievement. But his experiments had rendered my mother incapable of carrying any more children. He resorted to trying to copy Yagi's serum. By experimenting on the children he made. He glanced sideways, making eye contact with Midoriya. That's why he wants you. Yagi won't tell him anything, so he wants to reverse engineer the process. Midoriya's blood boiled as his hands curled into fists. So that's what that confrontation was all about. He never understood his own father for leaving his family behind, and he definitely could never understand Todoroki's father for doing any of these monstrous deeds. Through clenched teeth, Midoriya hissed, he will never lay another finger on you. Todoroki seemed very confused. I just told you that if he finds out who you are, he will kidnap you and tear you apart? It doesn't matter. If he hurt you. But he's never going to hurt you again. Todoroki frowned. Midoriya, don't you think your priorities are a little dash? Midoriya reached out and gently brushed his fingers against the burn scar over Todoroki's left eye. With a small gasp, his roommate fell silent, fixing him with vulnerable eyes. Later, it occurred to Midoriya that this was a gross invasion of personal space and that he never should have done it. Try as he might, Midoriya couldn't figure out how old the scar was. Did he do this to you? Todoroki blinked rapidly, as if trying to stave off tears. I don't remember. He and Mama got in a fight. There was a boiling kettle. He batted Midoriya's hand away and buried his face in his hands. Midoriya bit his lip. He'd gone too far. He leaned forward, being careful of the distance between them, and whispered, I'm sorry. They sat there in silence for a little while. Eventually, Todoroki lowered his hands and said, in a soft voice, I won't let him hurt you. I won't let him hurt you either.